Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rebecca Bliefnick. Rebecca and Tim, who met at Quincy University, were the epitome of a perfect couple. Rebecca was a biology major and a tennis player, while Tim was a star football player. 2 years after graduating, the practical couple decided to tie the knot. Instead of splurging on an engagement ring and a lavish honeymoon, they chose to save their money. Although Rebecca had a genuine interest in medicine and had dreamed of becoming a doctor, she decided to pursue motherhood instead. Her dream came true when she and Tim had 3 sons. Tim was known for his charisma and ability to entertain. In 2008, he auditioned for American Gladiators, making it to the final round. Years later, in 2019, he received an invitation from the producers of Family Feud to participate in the show with his family. Rebecca's nursing school commitments prevented her from joining Tim on the TV show Family Feud. Undeterred, Tim assembled a team of family members, including his parents and brothers. The show's format features 2 teams competing to guess the most popular responses to survey questions from 100 people. Despite being unprepared, Tim's team performed well, earning points and ranking second on the scoreboard. They went on to participate in 3 episodes, winning a total of $20,000, which was divided equally among the family members. However, Tim did not share any of the winnings with his wife Rebecca. This decision highlights the strain on Tim and Rebecca's marriage, which began when Rebecca pursued a nursing career against Tim's wishes. Tim had expressed concerns about Rebecca's well-being and ability to manage stress, but Rebecca's friends believed Tim was opposed to her independence and autonomy. Rebecca's friends noticed that she was becoming increasingly unhappy in her marriage over time. At first, her marriage to Tim was relatively happy for about 5 years, but then Tim started to become more controlling and manipulative. Despite Rebecca's hard work in her nursing studies and job, Tim didn't pull his weight at home, leaving Rebecca to handle most of the responsibilities. Rebecca realized that their marriage was struggling and wanted to fix it, so she suggested that they go to marriage counseling together. She believed that counseling could help them find solutions and improve their relationship. However, Tim refused to go, despite Rebecca's efforts to save their marriage. In January 2021, after 11 years of marriage, Tim suddenly filed for divorce, which caught Rebecca off guard. She had been committed to working through their issues, but Tim had already made up his mind. He moved out of their family home and into a new house across town, leaving Rebecca to pick up the pieces. Tim and Rebecca's divorce was extremely contentious. They were unable to agree on anything, and their communication broke down completely. The couple disputed several issues, including who would get custody of the children, how they would divide their property, and how much alimony one would pay the other. Things escalated to the point where Tim felt threatened and applied for a court order to protect himself from Rebecca, alleging that she was stalking and harassing him. Rebecca had a different view of the situation, accusing Tim of harassment. She shared her concerns with friends through text messages, describing incidents where Tim yelled at her, pushed her in front of their sons, and threw things. Rebecca feared Tim might do something drastic to take her children away, which alarmed her sister, who knew Rebecca's fears were valid and that she needed help to protect herself. Rebecca then filed for an order of protection against Tim, claiming he entered her home without permission and lied about their interactions. However, the judge denied both Rebecca and Tim's requests, instead ordering them to stay away from each other's homes, except during child custody exchanges. In February 2023, Tim told the police he wouldn't return a gun, calling Rebecca a derogatory name. At the time, Rebecca and Tim's 3 sons, aged 12, 10, and 5, were staying with Tim at his home, just a mile from Rebecca's residence. Their divorce was set to be finalized in just 1 week. Tim contacted Rebecca's father the next day, worried because he couldn't reach Rebecca, and she had failed to pick up the boys from school as planned. Given Rebecca's dedication as a mother, her father suspected something was seriously wrong. Concerned for Rebecca's safety, her father rushed to her house. When he arrived, he entered the house, calling out to Rebecca, but received no response. He went upstairs to her bedroom, where he found a disturbing scene. Rebecca lay on her back, covered in blood and gunshot wounds. After Rebecca's father discovered her body in the bathroom, detectives and forensic experts arrived at the house. They began by carefully examining the outside of the property, searching for clues. Their investigation revealed that the suspect had probably entered the house by forcing open an upstairs window in one of the children's bedrooms. The discovery led investigators to believe that the suspect used a patio chair to gain access to the house and climb up to the roof. By retracing the suspect's likely path, they went to Rebecca's bedroom, where they found the door had been violently kicked in or broken. The state of the door suggested to investigators that the suspect had forcibly entered the room, probably in search of Rebecca. Evidence indicated that Rebecca had tried to barricade herself in the bathroom, but the suspect had pursued her and caught up. Ultimately, the suspect shot Rebecca inside the bathroom. During their search of the bathroom where Rebecca's body was found, investigators stumbled upon her cell phone. Upon examining Rebecca's phone, investigators found a 911 call dialed at 1:11 a.m. This led them to form a theory about the events of that night. They believed that as the suspect chased Rebecca through the house, she tried to call for help, but accidentally dialed a wrong number before she could try calling 911 again. The misdialed call at 1:11 a.m. suggested to investigators that the suspect had knocked the phone out of Rebecca's hand. They believed Rebecca was likely killed around this time. However, when police questioned Rebecca's neighbors, none of them remembered hearing any noise around 1:11 a.m., which raised suspicions among the investigators. A thorough search of Rebecca's house revealed that her murder was not a botched burglary, as nothing was stolen. Despite this, the perpetrator left behind significant evidence. One notable discovery was a partial shoe print found near the point where the suspect entered the house. The shoe print discovered at the crime scene could be crucial in identifying the type of shoe worn by the suspect, including its make and model, as well as providing details about the size and shape of their feet. The presence of 8 9mm shell casings and small pieces of shredded plastic near Rebecca's body also provide significant leads for the investigators. Despite collecting these key pieces of evidence, the investigators were unsure how to interpret their findings. To gain more insight, they decided to send the evidence to forensic laboratories for further analysis. Specifically, they wanted to determine if any of Rebecca's personal belongings matched the evidence found at the crime scene. The investigation began when Rebecca's father found her lifeless body in the bathroom of her home. Upon arriving at the scene, investigators carefully examined the exterior of the house, leading them to identify how the perpetrator gained entry by prying open an upstairs window in one of the children's bedrooms. Here's what likely happened. The suspect used a patio chair to climb up to the roof and entered the house. The investigators retraced the suspect's steps and found that the bedroom door had been violently kicked in or broken, suggesting the suspect had forced their way in, probably looking for Rebecca. It seems Rebecca tried to barricade herself in the bathroom, but the suspect caught up with her. Unfortunately, the suspect shot and killed Rebecca in the bathroom. The investigators found Rebecca's phone near her body and examined it. They discovered that she had dialed 911, but mistakenly entered an extra digit, 91126, at 1:11 a.m. This discovery helped the investigators piece together the events. They believe Rebecca was desperately trying to call for help as the suspect chased her through the house, but she accidentally dialed the wrong number. Before she could try calling 911 again, the suspect likely knocked the phone out of her hand. The timing of the misdialed call at 1:11 a.m. led investigators to believe that Rebecca's murder likely occurred around that time. However, when they questioned Rebecca's neighbors, none of them reported hearing any suspicious noises, which was surprising given the fact that she had suffered multiple gunshot wounds. A thorough search of Rebecca's house revealed that her murder was not the result of a burglary gone wrong, as nothing was stolen. Despite this, the perpetrator left behind a significant amount of evidence. One crucial discovery was a partial shoe print near the point of entry, which could help identify the brand and model of the shoe, as well as the size and shape of the suspect's foot. The crime scene also yielded 8 9mm shell casings, and small pieces of shredded plastic were found scattered near Rebecca's body. After gathering all the evidence, the investigators were unsure what to make of their findings, so they decided to send the CED evidence to forensic laboratories for further analysis. The detectives wanted to determine if any of the evidence found at the crime scene matched Rebecca's belongings. A neighbor had installed a security camera on the side of their house after their car was broken into a year earlier. The camera was directed towards the neighbor's driveway, which shared a boundary with Rebecca's home, and was set to turn on and alert the neighbor whenever it detected movement. Although the camera didn't capture anything significant on the night of Rebecca's death, it did record something unusual the previous day at 1:05 a.m. The footage showed a person walking down the driveway towards the back of Rebecca's house, a potentially crucial discovery in the case. About 48 minutes after the initial sighting, the same individual was seen walking in the opposite direction. Interestingly, Rebecca's neighbor had captured a similar incident on their camera about a week prior, on February 14th. After reviewing their security footage, Rebecca's neighbors noticed a suspicious dark-clad figure lurking around her house on Valentine's Day, prompting them to alert her immediately. Upon learning about the mysterious figure, Rebecca became increasingly paranoid. Although she claimed not to have seen anyone on her property, she had heard unsettling voices in her backyard the previous night, which frightened her. Based on the security camera footage, the police expanded their search to neighboring houses to gather more evidence of the dark-clad individual. Their search led them to a house near the Quinney bus barn, where they found footage of a person riding a bike, dressed in dark clothing, heading towards Rebecca's house. These videos confirmed the description of the mysterious person seen in the original driveway footage, providing a clear consistency in the suspect's appearance. After analyzing the recorded times of the videos, detectives suspected that the person on the bike was the same individual seen in Rebecca's driveway footage. Although Rebecca's neighbor's security camera didn't capture footage of the mysterious person on the night of her murder, officers found footage of someone on a bike riding towards Rebecca's house just before and after the incident. This person matched the description of the individual seen lurking in Rebecca's driveway in the days leading up to her murder. While the video evidence was helpful in the investigation, its poor quality limited the information it provided. The detectives couldn't identify the person in the video due to the grainy image, making it difficult to determine their gender. However, they did notice one distinctive feature. The bike had no reflectors on its wheels. When Rebecca's sister heard that she was murdered, only one person came to mind as a suspect: Rebecca's estranged husband, Tim. Rebecca's sister, who had a first-hand account of the contentious divorce between Rebecca and Tim, shared this information with the detectives working on her sister's case. The detectives suspected Tim of murdering Rebecca, especially since her murder happened just a week before their divorce was due to be finalized. During the investigation, they made a crucial discovery: a bike with no reflectors on its wheels, similar to the one seen on security footage, was found just a block from Tim's house. This discovery increased the suspicion surrounding Tim, leading the detectives to obtain a search warrant for his home. When the police executed the warrant, Tim cooperated fully, standing outside his home with the officers as they searched his belongings. On March 13, 2023, 2 weeks after Rebecca's murder, Tim was arrested and charged with her murder. When his mugshot was released, Rebecca's family and friends were shocked by his appearance, which was very different from the clean-cut man they had known. Tim's friends and family were shocked by his disheveled appearance, which they attributed to the emotional toll of his recent divorce. His once neat and tidy hair was now unkempt, and his clothes were messy. They speculated that the divorce had affected not only his physical appearance, but also his mental well-being. However, Tim had a surprising explanation for his changed look. He revealed that he was growing his hair out to support a charity campaign for cancer research. Despite this, a viral video clip showed Tim's appearance on Family Feud, where he made a bizarre statement about regretting his marriage, which took on a disturbing tone after he was arrested for murdering his wife. Many people believed that Tim's comment on Family Feud was a strange and unsettling prediction of what would eventually happen. They thought it showed that he had hidden feelings about his wife and was a sign that something bad was happening in their relationship. When the police looked into Tim's phone, they found that he had made a fake Facebook account under the name John Smith. During their investigation, they discovered that Tim had been searching for a specific type of bicycle on Facebook, a blue Schwinn bike with no reflectors on the wheels. This was an important discovery because it matched the description of a bike that was found abandoned just 1 block away from Tim's house. Despite having strong evidence against Tim, the detectives faced a significant obstacle when they arrested him. Tim was held in jail without the possibility of bail, but he requested a quick trial, which is his right under the law. Prosecutors were required to bring the matter to trial within 90 days of Tim's arrest. The prosecution faced a significant challenge in convincing a jury, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Tim murdered Rebecca due to the absence of a confession or DNA evidence. Juries typically look for these 2 key elements in criminal cases. To prove Tim's guilt in the murder of his wife Rebecca, the prosecution faced a significant challenge. Exactly 3 months after Rebecca's tragic murder in her home, Tim's trial began on May 23, 2023. During the trial, the prosecution presented several key pieces of evidence found at the crime scene. One notable piece of evidence was the shredded plastic fragments discovered around Rebecca's body. The prosecution argued that these fragments came from an owl's grocery bag. Further investigation revealed that similar bags were found in Tim's house. The prosecution alleged that Tim used these bags as a makeshift silencer when he shot his estranged wife multiple times. They claimed that the bags were used to muffle the sound of the gunfire, preventing it from being heard by others. The prosecution also presented DNA evidence, suggesting that Tim left behind DNA while using the Aldi bags. An expert testified that it was highly likely Tim contributed to the DNA found, and that his DNA could not be ruled out as a match for the DNA found under Rebecca's fingernails. The prosecution presented evidence suggesting that a crowbar found in Tim's basement might have been used to force open the window at the victim's house on the night of the murder. Although an expert testified that there were microscopic similarities between the crowbar and the window's pry mark, she couldn't conclusively say that the crowbar was involved. To build a stronger case, the prosecution presented records of several searches made on Tim's phone, including how to open my door with a crowbar, how to make a homemade pistol silencer, how to clean gunpowder off your hands, and average police response time in Quinny. The prosecution's expert witness testified that she compared the shell casings found at the crime scene to those found at Tim's house during the investigation. Her analysis revealed that 27 of the casings from Tim's home were fired from the same 9mm weapon used to kill Rebecca. When investigators searched Tim's house, they didn't find Rebecca's 9mm gun, which he had refused to return to her. Tim claimed he hadn't seen the gun in months before Rebecca's murder. During the trial, the defense had the opportunity to call witnesses, but chose not to. After the 6-day trial, the jury took 4 hours to reach a guilty verdict, and Tim was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Despite claiming innocence and planning to appeal, Tim is behind bars, and Rebecca's family believes justice has been served. During the sentencing hearing, Rebecca's family read impact statements. One of her sisters addressed Tim, telling him how his actions affected his son's well-being. She stressed that his choices were causing his sons to suffer. Rebecca's sister vowed to keep her memory alive for her 3 sons, even after her passing. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lucy Landry. Lucy Davies was born in 1971 in Rhondda, a county in England. She was the daughter of Roger and Andrea Davies and had a younger sister named Anna. The family lived in a small, tight-knit community of socially purposed housing, surrounded by stunning mountain scenery. Lucy had a happy and carefree childhood, bonding closely with her sister, who shared similar interests. Her parents often mentioned Lucy's infectious joy, which made her a standout student in primary school. Known for her outgoing and likable personality, Lucy quickly won over her teachers and classmates. With her undeniable beauty, she became one of the most popular and admired girls in school. Lucy and her sister Anna shared a passion for ponies, which led their father to enroll them in the local riding club. This experience taught them discipline and showcased their talent, eventually earning them the right to participate in various events and competitions. By the time Lucy started secondary school, she had developed into an exceptional rider. In addition to her riding skills, Lucy was also a talented musician. She took flute and piano lessons, dedicating long hours to practice and master both instruments. Her hard work paid off, and soon she had a comprehensive understanding of classical music. This led to her acceptance into a youth orchestra and her school's choir group. During this time, Lucy developed a romantic interest in Gareth Jenkins, but she kept it a secret. After completing secondary school in 1989, Lucy decided to pursue a music-related career. She enrolled in the University of Warwick to study for a bachelor's degree, hoping to become a music teacher. However, she soon realized that the degree program wasn't what she had expected. Her passion for music remained, but she didn't enjoy the direction of the program. As a result, Lucy changed her plan and opted to study urban planning instead. Around this time, Lucy met Graham McAllister, and they soon discovered that they shared a similar outlook on life, including a passion for art and common interests. A key aspect of their bond was their matching sense of humor. Their relationship developed naturally, and as they made plans for the future, Lucy decided to introduce Graham to her parents, Roger and Andrea. The meeting went well, and Lucy's parents were convinced that Graham was the right person for their daughter. In fact, they were so confident in their relationship that they bought Lucy a house in Coventry, northwest of London. This gift not only provided Lucy with a stable home, free from the uncertainties of renting and moving, but also reflected their wish for her to start a family. Shortly after moving in, Lucy invited Graham to live with her, and they continued their studies together. In 1995, they welcomed their first child, James. Lucy decided to take a break from university to care for him while Graham continued his studies and worked the night shift at the city's postal sorting office. Over time, this arrangement took a toll on Lucy, who felt bored and isolated at home, caring for their child and often separated from her partner for long periods. To alleviate her boredom, Lucy turned to internet chat rooms, seeking to meet new people and find some distraction. One night, Lucy engaged in lively conversations in various online chat rooms, where she encountered Harold Landry, a 53-year-old American from Louisiana. Growing up in a financially struggling family with a dozen siblings, Harold knew from an early age that he had to rely on his own efforts and determination to succeed. To escape poverty, he dedicated himself to hard work from a young age. His big break came when he realized that the key to success in the oil business wasn't owning wells, but providing essential infrastructure to well owners. Consequently, he founded a company specializing in designing and manufacturing hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. As he had predicted, the business made him incredibly wealthy, eventually earning him billionaire status. By then, Harold split his time between his central hobbies and a property on KML Island in Mexico. He had been married and divorced twice, with children from these unions, whose exact number and identities remained private. One thing was certain, however: Harold ensured that his children lacked nothing. A significant event took place in 1992 when Harold, now single, met a woman 20 years younger who was married. Despite her marital status, Harold used his charms to win her over, undeterred by her family's or husband's potential opposition. On February 6, 1994, Harold took her on an outing in New Orleans, hiring a babysitter to watch her children. After their evening together, Harold dropped his lover off at home and offered to drive the babysitter back to her own place. Surprisingly, no one seemed worried that her husband would discover the infidelity and react angrily. However, that's precisely what happened. Outside his wife's residence, Chris Price had been keeping a close eye on her every move. When the third party said goodbye to her, Chris followed him in his car. A short while later, Harold noticed he was being tailed. Acting on instinct, Harold opened the glove compartment, pulled out a firearm he normally kept there, and prepared for a confrontation. When they both stopped at a red light, the situation escalated. According to the babysitter's account, Harold brandished the revolver at Chris and fired. The bullet severely injured Chris, severing an artery in his neck and damaging a nerve connected to his vocal cord. Chris collapsed on the pavement, but luckily, there was a hospital nearby, allowing him to receive prompt medical attention. The doctors were able to save his life. Harold was arrested and charged with attempted murder. His trial took place in 1997. The defense attorney argued in the opening statement that Harold's actions were the result of a tragic and sordid affair involving Chris, and that he had acted out of fear and in self-defense. This strategy led the jury, composed of 4 men and 8 women, to convict Harold of the lesser offense of aggravated assault. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, after an appeal, Harold was granted probation in exchange for a $500 fine and community service. Although he had hoped to be fully exonerated, he thanked his lawyer, Pat, for his efforts. The 2 men subsequently became close friends. After reaching a confidential agreement with Chris, Harold moved to Covington, where he lived a life of luxury, free from financial worries. When he started chatting with Lucy, he was open about his past, sharing stories about his jobs, romantic escapades, and legal issues. However, instead of deterring Lucy, this honesty only strengthened her attraction to him. The two began a captivating online romance, with Harold promising her a highly desirable lifestyle. Eventually, his persistence and persuasive abilities convinced Lucy to end her relationship with Gra, clearing the way for Harold to pursue her without any rival claiming his attention. In the early 2000s, Harold traveled to England to meet Lucy, and she took the opportunity to introduce him to her parents, Roger and Andrea, as her boyfriend. Although they were surprised by the significant age difference, they respected their daughter's decisions and did not object to the relationship. Harold felt fulfilled and fortunate to share his life with Lucy, and he spared no effort to surprise her, whether with luxurious gifts or anything else she desired. In fact, by then, he was so in love that he was already planning to propose marriage. However, he wanted to do it in an ideal setting. To achieve this goal, Harold took Lucy, her son James, and Gra on a trip to Mexico, a place that had become his favorite destination in the world. His longtime friend Pat, who had been his attorney in the past trial, also had an apartment close to his residence, which added to the feeling of comfort. Initially, Harold bought a diamond ring and shared the news with enthusiasm with Pat. However, Pat harbored certain suspicions about Lucy, and as the days passed, he found it strange that she had dedicated a good part of her time in Gra's company. Despite this, Harold was oblivious to it, and ultimately proceeded with his plan to propose. Lucy happily accepted the proposal, and in mid-2003, the couple celebrated their union. Shortly after, Harold surprised Lucy by buying a $1 million property in an exclusive Worcester neighborhood. In this peaceful rural setting, their marriage got off to a prosperous start, helped by their excellent neighbors, Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, with whom they formed a close friendship. Soon, Lucy gave birth to their first daughter, Harriet, which filled both her and Harold with joy. From then on, he devoted himself to the little girl with unwavering energy and commitment. He also maintained a loving relationship with James, treating him like his own son. As time passed, Lucy's workload increased, and her mood began to deteriorate in proportion to Harold's demands. He expected her to constantly adapt to his preferences and obey his requests without question. Lucy, however, had different expectations. This led to rising tensions between them. Lucy was outspoken and unafraid to express her opinions, but Harold was unwilling to compromise. Given their volatile personalities, their arguments frequently escalated into intense fights, followed by reconciliations once the conflict had subsided. The constant disputes that lasted for hours became a familiar background noise in the lives of Rachel and Stephen. They knew that Lucy and Harold's alcoholism fueled their arguments and complaints, which often led to days of not speaking to each other. Lucy reconnected with Gareth, an old friend from secondary school, and they spent hours catching up, occasionally interrupted by their own commitments. One evening, after Harold fell asleep, Lucy stayed on her computer, and it dawned on him that she was unhappy and looking for a distraction, possibly even a replacement, just like she had found him. In the autumn of 2009, Lucy invited Gareth to stay with her. Meanwhile, Harold returned to England, hoping to salvage their marriage, but as soon as he arrived home, Lucy asked him for a divorce. Initially, Harold was devastated, but after a few weeks, he started a new relationship with a woman he met online. Alongside their budding new relationships, divorce negotiations were progressing, and as is often the case, new disputes arose, particularly regarding the family home. Lucy's expectation was to retain the house, thereby guaranteeing a stable living arrangement for their children. However, Harold was adamant that this was not up for discussion. His proposed solution involved offering her financial compensation to purchase a more modest apartment independently. Simultaneously, he made the decision to entirely remove her from his will. Lucy was furious when she learned about her still husband's latest decisions. Her intense hatred towards him led her to share every detail about Harold's past with her son James, holding nothing back. Amidst the tension and complicated situation, Gareth invited her to take a break and spend a few days with him in Wales. Both Lucy and Harold had a serious drinking problem, and their arguments were becoming increasingly violent, leaving their children to suffer in a toxic environment. On the afternoon of February 1st, 2010, Harold had several glasses of wine. When Stephen returned from work, he found a notification that his package had been delivered to the wrong address, the Landrys. Harold invited Stephen in and offered him a glass of wine. This led to a ridiculous argument with Lucy over a piece of furniture she wanted to buy for their upcoming move. The argument quickly turned physical, and in the chaos, Harold grabbed a kitchen utensil and hit Lucy on the cheek. James rushed to the scene of the altercation and found his mother, Lucy, badly injured. He immediately called the police and then turned his attention to ensuring his younger sister's safety. Shortly after, Lucy, realizing she needed help, left the house with her children. Her first thought was to seek refuge at Stephen's house, which was nearby. As she headed in that direction, Harold caught up with her and attacked her with a knife, inflicting multiple injuries. He then left her lying under a bush in the garden, abandoning her. Stephen, alerted by Lucy's screams, rushed outside and found her just a few steps away. Initially, he thought she was unconscious, but quickly realized the gravity of the situation. The police responded promptly to the emergency call and arrived on the scene. They called for paramedics and searched the surrounding area for Harold, but only found the terrified children hiding in the backyard. The paramedics worked quickly to treat Lucy and rushed her to the hospital, where her heart unfortunately stopped beating shortly after arrival. Harold visited Rachel's house and confessed to her that a terrible event had occurred, but he didn't provide any additional information. He handed her 3 bank drafts worth a total of $40,000, some cash, the keys to his car, and several signed blank checks. After that, he headed back home. By then, multiple police patrols were searching for him. They eventually found him walking along the road and arrested him. Roger and Andrea were consumed by grief when they heard the devastating news. In a statement released by the police, they requested that people respect their privacy during this incredibly difficult time following the loss of their daughter. From that point on, their focus shifted to taking care of their grandchildren. The forensic examination revealed that Lucy's death was caused by multiple stab wounds to the chest. With this evidence, combined with James's eyewitness testimony, Harold was charged with murder on February 5, 2010, when he appeared in court. The trial took place in early February 2011, presided over by Judge David Fosin. Unlike previous instances, Pat did not serve as Harold's defender. Instead, attorney Andy Childs took on the role. Despite the challenging task ahead, Childs argued that Harold had been provoked by his wife's intense anger, leaving him no choice but to react as he did. During his emotional testimony, Harold expressed his love for Lucy and regretted his actions. Following the strategy outlined by his lawyer, Harold admitted to involuntary manslaughter, claiming that Lucy had driven him to his limits. To emphasize the brutality of the case, the prosecution presented a detailed animation in court, recreating the multiple injuries the victim suffered. This graphic presentation shocked those present in the courtroom. Ultimately, on February 24, 2011, the jury delivered a verdict after less than 4 hours of deliberation. They found Harold Landry guilty of murdering his 38-year-old wife, Lucy Landry, when he was 64 years old. The next day, the judge imposed the sentence. He strongly condemned Harold's actions, calling them indescribable and unforgivable. The judge rejected Harold's claims that Lucy may have provoked him, seeing them as a desperate attempt to avoid blame. As a result, Harold received a life sentence with a minimum term of 16 years before being eligible for parole. By the time he would be eligible, he would be over 80 years old. Lucy's loved ones expressed gratitude, not only for the resolution of the case, but also for the judge's thoughtful comments, which they felt accurately reflected their own emotions. They acknowledged that the sentence brought some sense of relief from their pain, although they recognized that no length of sentence could restore Lucy's life, and they would need to come to terms with this difficult reality. Harold, on the other hand, maintained his claim of innocence, stating that he hoped to appeal the sentence in the future. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shelby Von Holt. Shelby Von Holt was born on September 7, 2000 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, USA, as a cheerful young girl. She was the second of 5 children in her family, which consisted of her mother, Shah Hartman, father, Von Holt, older sister, Peyton Hartman, and younger siblings, Devin Von Holt and Isaac Von Holt. Shelby graduated from Troy Center High School in 2018 and spent the next 2 years working at a steakhouse and other places. During this time, she was contemplating her desired career path and seemed to be leaning towards a therapeutic field, although she had not yet decided on the exact specialty. As a 20-year-old, Shelby was living life to the fullest, known for her cheerful personality that made her the life of every party. She loved to smile, dance, sing, and spend time with friends. Notably, she was living independently, although the reasons for this were unclear. While she was not active on most social media platforms, she frequently posted cheerful photos on Facebook, many of which featured moments shared with her young niece, Camila, who is the daughter of her older sister, Peyton. According to her mother, Shelby met Valerie Rose Hardick, a 22-year-old woman, on Facebook. Although they reportedly did not have a close relationship, Valerie's life is shrouded in mystery, with rumors of a troubled childhood, questionable associations, and potential mental health challenges. On June 20th, 2021, at 6:48 p.m., a 911 dispatcher received a distress call from a woman who managed to convey that she was injured and claimed Valerie shot her. Although it's unclear whether the woman provided her address or if the police traced the call, officers from the Fort Wayne Police Department arrived at Shelby's residence shortly after. Upon arrival, the officers forced entry into the residence and found Shelby barely conscious, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds, and surrounded by a large pool of blood. One officer stayed with Shelby while the others conducted a protective sweep of the residence to ensure no other victims were present and that the perpetrator was not still inside. They did this while waiting for an ambulance and local firefighters to arrive. During this time, the officers attempted to provide first aid, and a surgeon asked Shelby if she knew who had shot her. Shelby identified Valerie as the attacker. Emergency medical personnel soon took over Shelby's care, rushing her to the nearby hospital, where she was in critical condition but still alive. Meanwhile, Shelby's family was informed of the incident, and Fort Wayne Police Department officers began gathering evidence from her home. A doorbell camera was a significant piece of evidence, and after reviewing its footage, a person of interest was identified, though details were not publicly disclosed at the time. In a remarkable coincidence, a disturbing incident took place the day after Shelby's critical injury, approximately 50 kilometers away in Ohio. At around 10:30 a.m., the local police department received multiple calls about a suspicious-looking young woman lurking around a convenience store at a gas station. According to eyewitnesses, she had been wandering around the store and near the gas pumps for about an hour, seemingly trying to catch a glimpse of customers' credit card numbers as they made their purchases. Furthermore, the police had already received a prior call from a man who reported seeing the same woman earlier at the convenience store, claiming that she had pointed a gun at his back. After taking precautions, police officers arrived at the gas station where they found the woman and arrested her without any violence. The 22-year-old woman was identified as Valerie Rose Hardick. She had a 9mm handgun on her, which was the same type of weapon used in the attack on Shelby. Shelby had already identified her attacker as Valerie, which made the police even more certain they had the right person. The car Valerie was driving was the same one captured on Shelby's doorbell camera, leaving the scene just before Shelby called for help. Although the investigation is ongoing, Valerie was taken into custody and transferred to the county jail, where she will await her court hearing in the local municipal court. Shelby was clinging to life after being gravely injured by 89mm bullet wounds to her chest and abdomen. Doctors placed her in an induced coma and did everything they could to save her. Unfortunately, 3 days after the brutal attack on June 22, 2021, Shelby's body gave in to the injuries, and she was pronounced dead. According to her mother and media reports, Shelby died after undergoing 4 complex abdominal surgeries that did not yield the desired results. She received 20 blood transfusions, but the medical outlook was always bleak. If Shelby had survived, doctors believed her legs would have needed to be amputated. The brutal murder raises questions about what could drive someone to commit such a heinous crime. According to the limited information available, investigators attributed the motive to jealousy. It is alleged that Shelby was dating a man who Valerie was strongly attached to, although his identity was not revealed. Valerie was charged with criminal assault and aggravated threats. Initially held in Ohio on a $100,000 bail for threatening a man with a firearm at a gas station, Valerie was later transferred to Allen County to face charges for Shelby's murder. Shelby Von Holt's remains were memorialized in a private ceremony at a funeral home on June 29, 2021, and then cremated. In early 2022, Valerie Rose Hardick entered a plea deal in connection with Shelby's murder. Hardick pleaded guilty, citing mental illness as a defense. As part of the deal, the prosecution dropped a charge related to the use of a firearm during the crime, which could have added 20 years to her sentence. In September 2022, Hardick's sentencing hearing took place in the Superior Court of Allen County. As agreed, she pleaded guilty but mentally ill. During the hearing, her defense attorney presented mitigating circumstances, including her difficult upbringing, marked by her stepmother's death, abuse by her stepbrother, and a history of mental health issues. However, the prosecutors emphasized the jealousy motive behind Shelby's murder and highlighted Hardick's criminal history, which had escalated over time. They also noted that Hardick was on probation at the time of the murder, having been part of an alternative program due to previous charges. Throughout the hearing, Valerie's behavior was inconsistent. At times, she seemed coherent and fully aware of the situation, but at other moments, she appeared nervous, distracted, and even smiled at Shelby's family. Despite this, she answered the court's questions accurately. Although the exact content of her statements was not specified in media reports, it was noted that she never expressed remorse or apologized to Shelby's family. Shelby's parents, on the other hand, poignantly conveyed their profound loss during their victim impact statements. Shelby's father reminisced about his daughter's love for symbolic icons like peace signs and how she was still finding her way in life at the time of her murder. He reflected on Valerie's demeanor during her guilty plea, stating that her voice conveyed a lack of remorse. The grieving father asserted that by admitting to intentionally killing Shelby, Valerie seemed to take pride in her crime, which demonstrated a clear lack of regret. Toby expressed his belief that there was more to the story behind Valerie's motivation for killing Shelby than just jealousy, and he referenced the defense's argument about Valerie's mental health issues. Shelby's father pointed out that many people in prison have mental health issues, and he vowed to continue seeking answers about the tragedy. In a heartfelt reflection, Toby noted that there were two tragedies in this case. The first was the shocking and agonizing death of his daughter, and the second was Valerie's decision to throw away her future in a fit of rage. He acknowledged that Valerie's children would greatly suffer as a result. It was revealed that Valerie, who was 22 years old, had at least 2 children, although no further details about them were publicly disclosed. The grieving father said that the tragedy wouldn't stop at the graveyard or in the courtroom, because true justice couldn't be achieved in such a tragic situation. However, he said he had forgiven Valerie in order to find peace within himself, which he believed was guided by his faith in Christ. He was confident that Shelby was with God and reiterated his deep love for her. Shelby's mother, Shauna, also spoke about her feelings. She remembered her daughter as a princess from the day she was born, describing her as a kind spirit who would always help a friend, no matter the distance. Shauna vowed to attend all possible appeal hearings that Valerie's defense might initiate in the future. She shared the pain of remembering her lifeless daughter and the helplessness she felt, unable to protect her. All she could do was lay her head on Shelby's chest as her daughter lay in a medically induced coma. She publicly praised her daughter's courage, saying that Shelby had managed to name her attacker twice and fought hard for her life after being attacked. Shauna detailed the severe injuries Shelby suffered, explaining that her heart was racing at an unsustainable pace. Although Shelby's medical expenses totaled nearly $500,000, Shauna didn't seek compensation because they were waived following her death. The funeral expenses alone were around $115,000, but Shauna emphasized that she didn't expect to receive any compensation and didn't want any money from Valerie. Holding back tears, Shelby's mother poignantly expressed that memories were all she had left, and she wished she could trade places with her daughter. She noted that some days, the grief was so intense that she couldn't muster the strength to get up. After the legal representatives finished their presentations and the victim's family statements, the court awaited the judge's verdict. Under Indiana law, the sentence could range from a minimum of 45 years to a maximum of 65 years, with an average of 55 years. Valerie's defense team requested the minimum sentence, citing various mitigating factors, while the prosecution sought the maximum sentence. Before making his decision, the judge pointed out that it was clear the murder was planned in advance, and Valerie was fully aware of her actions. Her decision to flee to Ohio further supported this. While the judge acknowledged that Valerie had a difficult upbringing, marked by inadequate education, personal traumas, and mental health issues, he emphasized that she already had a growing criminal record at the time of Shelby's murder, including pending charges for a separate crime. Despite her past attempts at rehabilitation, her criminal history and lack of success in those attempts meant her traumatic past could not be used as an excuse. Taking these factors into account, the judge sentenced the 23-year-old Valerie to the maximum possible sentence of 65 years in prison. He also ordered the destruction of the weapon used in the murder. According to the American Correctional System's records, Valerie is currently incarcerated in an Indiana women's prison, with the earliest estimated release date being June 18, 2027, at which time she will be 72 years old. After the court session, Shelby's parents said they were satisfied with the verdict. However, they later made it clear that no verdict could ease their pain, especially since Valerie would be spending her days in prison. Shelby's mother emphasized that she would always miss and remember her daughter. This case is particularly notable because the victim, who was mortally wounded, was able to identify her killer. A prosecutor not involved in the case explained that when a dying victim identifies their attacker, this is known as a dying declaration. These statements provide a crucial lead for detectives and are the only exception to the hearsay rule in court trials, ensuring that the most reliable evidence is presented. The prosecutor also stressed that dying declarations are admissible in court because they tend to produce more trustworthy statements, given the immense pressure and tragic circumstances surrounding them. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sony Millbrook. Sony Millbrook was born in Memphis, Tennessee, USA on February 15, 1981. She grew up in a close-knit family with 2 sisters, 3 brothers, and a large extended family, which allowed her to form a strong bond with her cousin Jenny during her teenage years. In 1998, at the age of 17, Sony became a popular student at her high school. The same year, she met Lelth Moody, a man in his 20s, and began a romantic relationship with him. Unfortunately, the relationship turned out to be abusive, and Elth's violent behavior left visible marks on Sony's body. Despite this, they had 4 children together, 3 girls and a boy named after Elth. A year later, in 1999, Sony's mother noticed a bruise on her chest. Sony confessed that the bruise was caused by her friend Leith, who was controlling and often tried to isolate her from her friends and family. In the same year, Sony moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. However, her new home was soon vandalized, with furniture slashed, clothes missing, the television destroyed, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including down the stairs. On the mirror, someone had written, "Kiki loves you" in red nail polish, with Kiki being Leith's nickname. On October 31, 2000, Sony, her cousin Pamela, and Leith went to a bar called Mirage. While they were there, Leith slapped Sony and threw a drink in her face. Sony and Pamela left the bar and sat in the car, where Sony was visibly shaken and trembling. She asked Pamela to take her home before Leith arrived. Once home, Sony locked and chained the door. An hour later, Leith showed up, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela finally got Leith to leave by threatening to call the police. After Sony calmed down, her cousin left her alone at home. However, later that evening, Pamela got a call saying that Sony was in the hospital. Somehow, Leith had managed to get into the house, and when Sony tried to end the relationship, he violently retaliated. He tore her clothes, beat her on the head, face, chest, arms, and thighs, leaving her with bruises all over her body, a loose tooth, and even temporarily losing consciousness after being choked until she passed out by Leith Moody. Not long after, Sony discovered Leith Moody's birth control pills in her apartment, and he assaulted her again. By late 2008, when Sony was 27, she was working at a Christian academy. She was a reliable employee who always arrived on time, so when she missed work or requested time off, it was usually for significant reasons. One day, she called her employer to say she couldn't come in because her face was badly bruised, and she didn't want the children to see her like that. The director allowed her to wear sunglasses inside the academy, and Sony confided in her boss about how her boyfriend had once chased her in his car, trying to force her off the road. Leith Moody's violence wasn't limited to Sony and their children. In April 2008, he was found parked in an SUV with a firearm, despite being prohibited from possessing one as a convicted felon. He had already served 2 years in prison for theft and another 3 for drug possession with intent to sell. On October 6, 2008, the situation between Sony and her boyfriend Leith reached a crisis point. After failing to show up at the academy, Sony sent a distressing text message to her boss at 5 p.m., stating that Leith was holding her hostage in her own home and had been beating her all day. She provided her address, prompting her boss to alert the police. 2 officers responded to the call and arrived at the residence. When they knocked on the door, it was locked from the inside, and there was no response. The fire department was called to break down the door, and upon entering the apartment, the officers saw Leith jumping out of an open window at the back of the apartment. Sony stood in the hallway, visibly distraught and unable to speak. Her 4 children were with her, creating a heart-wrenching scene. Her face and neck were covered in bruises and scratches. Once she calmed down, Sony recounted the events that had unfolded. She and Leith had started arguing, and he had refused to let her leave the house. Sony explained that they had not answered the door earlier because Leith had forbidden her or the children from approaching it or the windows. He had even hurt one of their children by grabbing him and had prevented her from taking him to the hospital. Sony detailed the physical and verbal abuse she had suffered at Leith's hands, including being choked with a baby blanket until she lost consciousness. When the police arrived, Leith had threatened to suffocate her again, vowing to kill her next time. Although the officers searched the area, they were unable to find Leith. Sony and her children eventually left the house in her car. 3 days after the incident, Sony applied for a restraining order against Leith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any further contact with him. However, she failed to attend the court hearing on October 23rd, which meant the protection order was never granted. 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony and Leith were still in contact. On that day, Leith was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead, he started a fight with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly escalated, with Leith slapping her, pulling her hair, and yelling death threats as she tried to escape. Sony managed to break free and ran out of the apartment, with Leith chasing after her. He didn't catch her, but instead grabbed their youngest child, an infant, and drove off at high speed. A police patrol, responding to the domestic disturbance, arrived just as Leith was fleeing. The officers attempted to stop him, but he evaded them and escaped. By early 2010, Sony, then 28 years old, was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. Her 5th child was 9 weeks old and in fragile health, requiring her to stay home and care for him. In January, Sony and their children moved into the Budget Lodge Motel in Memphis. On the very day they moved in, their arguments were so loud that the motel staff intervened, as they were disturbing other guests. Unfortunately, peace remained elusive, as their fights continued to disturb the neighbors and the management with excessive noise. On January 22nd, a hotel security guard witnessed Leith in a highly agitated state when he arrived at high speed in Sony's car. He began shouting at her while she stood on the second-floor balcony with their children. During the heated argument, Leith threw a bag of groceries at her. The security guard intervened, telling Leith that he needed to keep the noise down and refrain from throwing objects, and that the argument should be continued inside their room. However, Leith responded by telling the guard to mind his own business, locked the car, and walked away, with the guard following him to a third-floor room that was not registered under anyone's name. When the guard asked Leith to hand over any hotel keys he had, Leith surprisingly produced keys to 3 different rooms, despite not being registered as a guest. The following day, Leith, Sony, and their children moved to room 222. That evening, the night manager asked Leith to leave, which he did, but he soon returned. The confrontations persisted for a few more days until the same security guard, who had repeatedly warned them, finally asked Leith to vacate the property permanently. As Leith went to the parking lot, the receptionist attempted to calm him down, and the guard warned him not to return that night. Leith got into the car and drove away. On January 26th, Sony privately shared with Pamela that a lot was going on in her life and that she was currently staying at a motel. She hinted that she had something important to confide in Pamela and promised to get in touch if she ended up leaving the motel or if her boyfriend did. The next day began like any other, with Sony taking her younger kids to daycare and dropping off her oldest at school around 11 a.m. However, things took a turn when the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door, speaking to her through the window, to inform her that they needed to settle their bill or leave the hotel room. He returned several times that day, looking for a response. At around 2:30 p.m., Leith answered the door, telling the manager that his mother would be back soon with the money they owed. But when the hotel security guard checked room 222, he found it empty, with children's clothes, bags, and various items scattered all over the floor. One of the beds was neatly made, which seemed out of place given the state of the room. Later that day, Sony failed to pick up her eldest daughter from school, which was unusual. The school secretary called Christine, the child's maternal grandmother, to come and get her. Christine tried calling Sony, but there was no answer. Growing worried, she discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Convinced something was wrong, Christine asked her husband to pick up the younger kids while she went to the school. They eventually contacted the police, who arrived at the house around 10:30 p.m. and filed a missing persons report. On January 28th, the housekeeping manager re-entered room 222, which was now vacant, to collect and label the personal belongings that the previous tenants had left behind, apparently to avoid paying their bill. The room contained piles of clothing and a large trash bag, which were both taken to the storage area. After emptying the room, it was thoroughly cleaned and readied for new guests. The following day, on January 29th, James and Rhonda Sargent moved into room 222. Upon moving in, the new tenants immediately noticed a strong, unpleasant odor in the room. They attempted to mask it by burning incense, but this effort was unsuccessful. During their search for the source of the smell, they discovered that the previous tenants had also tried to hide it, as evidenced by the scented tissues they found stuck in the tiles and ceiling vents. The smell was most pronounced when someone sat on the bed. On January 29th, the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to ask about Sony's whereabouts, as it was the last place she was seen. However, the officers did not search room 222. Leith was found on February 2nd at around 7 p.m. in Sony's car, which was parked at a shopping center. He was arrested for stealing the vehicle and held in police custody for 48 hours. During that time, he was questioned about Sony's disappearance. Leith said the last time he saw her was on January 26, when they met at 7 a.m. in the hotel parking lot, went to the room, were intimate, and then went back outside. According to Leith, Sony let him take her car keys because she planned to use her social benefits and a school loan to buy a new car. However, investigators discovered that Leith had actually been staying at a different hotel, making it unlikely that he spent nights in the car, especially considering the snow during that period. On February 3rd, police found a debit card with Sony's name, along with several recent purchase receipts inside the car. On the same day, police examined the clothes that had been stored at the hotel, searching for DNA or other evidence, but they found nothing. This lack of progress added to their frustrations, and as a result, Leith had to be released due to insufficient evidence linking him to Sony's disappearance. Meanwhile, Sony's cousin and her mother had the painful task of going to the hotel to collect Sony's belongings. Sony's cousin had a terrible premonition, but unfortunately, she did not find anything to support her feelings. On February 4th, the police went to Moody's uncle's house, where they found a DVD player that had been taken from the hotel room in Sony's wallet. Moody had given these items to his cousin, who told the police that Leith had borrowed the DVD player on January 24th, saying he wanted to watch a movie. Leith was seen driving a red car that day. Later, when the cousin asked Leith why he hadn't picked up the children on January 27th, Leith avoided the question. When asked about Sony, Leith left the DVD player and wallet in a bag and quickly left the house. James and Rhonda Sargent asked to be moved from room 222 because of the constant bad smell. Since no other rooms were available, they had to move to a different hotel. However, even after the room was cleaned and the carpet was washed in early February, subsequent guests in room 222 still complained about the foul smell, which only slightly improved for a few days. Sony's family, especially her kids, were devastated by her disappearance. Their only hope was for her safe return. On February 4th, homicide detectives visited the hotel where Sony was last seen. By then, her room had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. The detectives didn't enter the room, but asked the staff if they had noticed anything unusual, and all said no. On February 7th, James and Rhonda, probably relatives or friends of Sony, returned to the hotel and changed rooms 3 times, including one night in room 222, which was the same room Sony had stayed in. They told the management that the rooms still smelled bad. In March, a deeper cleaning of room 222 was carried out, including the carpets, bedding, bathroom curtains, and window drapes. But to everyone's surprise, the smell didn't go away. It got stronger. The manager talked to the security guard about the issue, and during their conversation, they remembered that Sony had vanished at the end of January. The guard recalled the events from that time and suggested that the manager check room 222 for signs of blood or cleaning products. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to come with him. What they found was horrifying. The 2 men walked into the room to find that the manager had removed the mattress from one bed, leaving only the frame behind. The lower part of the bed frame had a built-in enclosure, which prevented the space underneath from being used as a storage area. However, when they lifted the box spring, they discovered a large empty space that could conceal anything. As they peered through the solid edges of the frame, they stumbled upon a gruesome sight, a decomposing body. They immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. Upon inspection, the bed frame was found to have marks all over it, with 2 broken wooden areas near the headboard. A towel and a cloth bag were discovered between the legs of the body, which was dressed in a shirt, but was naked from the waist down. The autopsy conducted by the forensic team revealed that the cause of death was strangulation using a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the victim's neck, under one arm, around the chest, and ended at the back. According to the forensic examiner, it would have taken at least 2 to 3 minutes of continuous pressure to cause death. DNA analysis matched Sony's genetic profile, which included female markers. Additionally, male genetic material was found on 5 parts of the cable. The main theory was that Sony was already dead when she was reported missing, and that Leith had used the coaxial cable from the DVD player he had borrowed from his cousin, suggesting premeditation. Leith was detained by the police shortly after, although not for the discovery of Sony's body. He was arrested on a separate charge of possessing a firearm, despite a prior felony conviction. Despite this, he was considered a person of interest at the time of his arrest, as he was the last person seen with Sony alive. Furthermore, he was found in Sony's car when he was arrested and taken to the detention facility in Mason on March 18th. The police have launched an internal investigation to find out why the case took such an unusual turn. They acknowledged that the family deserved answers and explained that despite their eagerness to solve the case, the officers had taken a wrong turn that led them away from the room. The police also stated that they had never dealt with a situation like this before, saying that the discovery was more astonishing than fiction and highlighted the tragedy of domestic violence. However, they regretted that the room had been cleaned and rented out multiple times since Sony's death, which made it difficult for them to collect evidence. Rhonda, one of the first tenants to occupy the room where Sony's body was found, expressed skepticism about the police explanation when she spoke to the media. She pointed out that if the officers had asked to enter the room during their January visit, she and her husband would have let them in. Rhonda argued that unlike her and her husband, the officers should have been able to recognize the smell of a decomposing body and found Sony much sooner. Finally, the time arrived to bid a loving and dignified farewell to Sony. On March 24th, her funeral took place. Following her death, Sony's children were placed in the care of her sister and brother-in-law. By April 1st, they had begun the process of obtaining legal guardianship of the children. She acknowledged that while the children were the primary victims of the tragedy, the lives of all family members were severely disrupted. She vowed that although she couldn't bring her sister back, she was resolute in providing for Sony's children, ensuring they received the necessities like food, clothing, and toys, and keeping them together as a family unit. Sony had benefited from a social program that refilled her debit card for grocery purchases on a regular basis. Shortly before her disappearance, the card was replenished as part of her tax refund. The police were able to track the card's movements, which led them to Leith, who was found with the card. Their investigation showed that the card was used on February 1st, 4 days after Sony went missing, at a convenience store she regularly visited on the 1st of each month to withdraw cash using her electronic benefit transfer card. The police visited the store and asked the owner to share the footage from the 16 security cameras. The surveillance system had captured footage of a man wearing yellow clothing using Sony's card at 11:38 a.m. on February 1st. He bought a bottle of orange juice, withdrew some cash, and purchased a cigar. After making the purchases, the man returned to a car driven by another person. In February 2014, nearly 4.5 years after the crime, Leith's trial finally began. By this time, the Budget Lodge Hotel where the couple had stayed had closed down. Leith maintained his innocence, while the prosecutor described the events as a tragic and ugly culmination of a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, the defense attorney highlighted the lack of concrete evidence, including witnesses and physical proof, and disputed the prosecution's speculations. The defense attorney brought to attention a crucial piece of evidence, a fingerprint found on the bed frame that did not belong to Leith, suggesting the possibility of an alternate perpetrator. He also mentioned that Sony had been involved with other men in the past, which could have led to her murder. The attorney emphasized that Leith had no prior arrests for domestic violence against Sony. Furthermore, he revealed that Sony had moved back in with Leith due to a rat infestation at a relative's house where she was previously staying. On February 6th, a video was shown in court, which captured Leith using a prepaid Sony card just 4 days after the murder. While the defense team suggested that Leith's calm behavior during the transaction suggested he was innocent, The prosecution saw it as a sign of a cold-blooded and ruthless individual who was unbothered by the crime he had allegedly committed. On February 7, 2014, Leith was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. 3 days later, on February 10th, Leith appealed the sentence, arguing that the court had made an error by considering his past history of domestic violence, and that the evidence presented was insufficient. However, on July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction, confirming the sentence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Jonia Berry. Jonia Berry was born on August 26, 1983, and grew up to be a happy and friendly person with a large social circle and a love for parties. During her school days, she was an active member of the local cheerleading team. After completing high school, Jonia enrolled at East Tennessee State University to pursue a degree in psychology and criminology. It was during this period that she met Jason White, and they began dating. The couple got engaged just before graduating in late 2004. At the age of 21, Jonia decided to pursue a master's degree in psychology, which led her to temporarily relocate to Knoxville for her studies. While in Knoxville, she worked part-time at a children's educational center, where she discovered her passion for helping kids. Meanwhile, Jonia's fiancé, Jason, was studying law in a different state. Despite the distance, they remained close and began planning their wedding in Knoxville. Initially, Jonia stayed with her friend Jason Amami, who had also attended college with her and later moved to Knoxville. They shared a 2-bedroom apartment, and Jason allowed Jonia to stay there until she found her own place to live. Jonia had 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. On the Sunday night of December 5th, after finishing her shift at the jewelry store, Jonia went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. Later, she returned home and spent her evening wrapping presents for the children at the educational center, chatting with her neighbor, and then retreating to her room. Before going to bed, she had a phone conversation with her boyfriend. Around 4 in the morning, Jason Amami was awoken by a scream from a woman. At first, he thought Jonia was having a nightmare, so he went to her room to check on her. However, he was shocked to find a stranger wielding a knife. The intruder attacked Jason, and they engaged in a fierce struggle. Eventually, Jason managed to fend off the attacker and made a dash for the door. He rushed out of the apartment and ran to the nearest convenience store, almost a kilometer away, to call for help. When the store clerk saw Jason, who was covered in blood, they immediately called 911. Jason explained to the police what had happened when they arrived at the scene. At their apartment, the police found Jonia lying in the hallway that connected 5 apartments. She was still alive, but barely conscious. When the police questioned her about the attacker, she could only provide weak clues. The police searched the entire building and the surrounding area, but were unable to find the attacker. They rushed Jonia to the nearest hospital, where despite the doctor's best efforts, they were unable to save her. The doctor reported that she had suffered more than 20 stab wounds, making survival highly unlikely. Jason had 8 wounds from the attacker. Although only 1 was critical, he received medical attention, and his life was no longer in danger. Meanwhile, the detectives began investigating the crime scene. They discovered blood in the hallway, indicating that Jonia had attempted to seek help from her neighbors, but none of them had opened their doors. Next to Jonia's room, the detectives found the murder weapon, a kitchen knife that belonged to Jason, which the attacker had used with such force that it became bent and damaged. The police discovered blood near the back door of the apartment and on the stairs leading to the street. As Jason and Jonia had exited through the front door, detectives believed the killer likely escaped through the back door in Jason's room. Another clue was found, a partial footprint, possibly left by the attacker when they followed Jason and attacked him. The brutal nature of Jonia's murder led police to suspect a personal motive. Initial investigations focused on Jonia's boyfriend, despite him being approximately 1,000 kilometers away from Knoxville. However, friends and family testified to their wonderful relationship, and he had no apparent reason to commit such a heinous crime. He learned of Jonia's death when her mother called him at 10 a.m. and claimed to have fainted and taken a long time to recover. In his incapacitated state, he required a neighbor's assistance to book a plane ticket and pack his suitcase. After carefully verifying his alibi, investigators concluded he couldn't have physically traveled to Knoxville and back by morning, thus ruling him out as a suspect and shifting their attention to Jonia's neighbor. In contrast to Jonia's boyfriend, who had a solid alibi, this particular neighbor did not, which raised suspicions that he might be the perpetrator. Many friends and family members of Jonia suspected him, with some believing he could be the killer, and others accusing him of leaving Jonia behind as he fled the apartment. The suspicion was so deep-seated that Jonia's parents didn't even want him to attend her funeral. After Jason was released from the hospital, investigators started questioning him. He maintained his original story, stating that he had heard screams, seen an unfamiliar man, and was attacked after successfully fighting off the attacker. Jason rushed to the front door, went out into the street, and sought help from the neighbors. He thought Jonia had also escaped from the apartment because he could no longer hear her screams. However, the police had doubts about the truth of this testimony. Doubts about Jason initially stemmed from his injuries. Although he had 8 wounds, 7 were superficial, and the 8th on his right arm could have been sustained while either defending himself or attacking someone. Furthermore, the absence of forced entry into the apartment suggested that the assailant might have already been inside. Jason claimed to have taken out the trash through the back door that night, but he couldn't recall whether he had locked it. The detectives pressed him further, focusing on which door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason maintained that he had left through the front door, but the police suspected he was lying. If Jason had actually exited through the back door, it would account for the bloodstains near the door leading to the stairs, thereby heightening suspicions against him. Additionally, the police accused him of using and selling illegal drugs and of becoming aggressive when he couldn't get his fix. Jason denied all these allegations, but the investigators continued to level various charges against him. After spending several hours at the police station, the detectives asked Jason to take a polygraph test, and to their surprise, he accepted. An expert was brought in to administer the test, during which Jason was asked a series of leading questions. When the test was over, the investigators told him that he had failed, suggesting that his responses were false. This news caused Jason to become extremely upset, shouting that he was innocent and had no involvement in the crime, that his life was in danger, and that the real perpetrator was still at large. Despite his protests, the detectives remained skeptical. Police couldn't charge Jason due to lack of evidence. Lab analysis of the murder weapon revealed 3 DNA samples: the victim's, Jason's, and an unknown man's. The unknown DNA was also found elsewhere in the apartment. A bloody fingerprint on the knife handle didn't match Jason's. These findings suggested another person was present, but the unknown DNA didn't match any in the database. Despite this, public opinion still doubted Jason's innocence. Jason developed PTSD after a flawed polygraph test led to false accusations. In reality, Jason had severe lung and neck injuries with little hope of recovery. However, due to police report inaccuracies, his treatment was only 25% covered, leaving him in financial distress. After the police stopped suspecting him, they started questioning Jason as a witness. Based on his account, they managed to create a rough description of the attacker. However, the situation was complicated by the fact that Jason didn't get a clear look at the assailant's face. The apartment was dimly lit, and the attacker had pounced on him as soon as he left the room. In Jonia's room, the investigators made an intriguing discovery. A cap was found near the back staircase, along with discs and a stereo player. At first, they thought these items might belong to Jonia or Jason, but Jason denied any connection to them, claiming they were not in his apartment. This led the investigators to suspect that the killer might have left them behind. The police released a rough sketch of the suspect to the media, and after it was published, they received hundreds of leads. Many people reported individuals who vaguely matched the sketch, prompting the detectives to investigate each of these leads. One lead in particular caught their attention: a group of local teenagers known to break into houses to steal. One of these teenagers, 19-year-old Michael, bore a resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The police launched a search for Michael, which was made more complicated by the fact that he was already wanted for theft. With the possibility of his involvement in murder, 2 police units joined the search for Michael. They tracked down Michael and brought him in for questioning about the murder. As soon as he was in custody, the investigators turned their attention to his shoes, which had a tread pattern that was similar to the footprint found at the crime scene. They took DNA and fingerprint samples from Michael and sent them to the lab for analysis. While waiting for the results, they questioned him, and he made a surprising confession. Michael claimed that he and a friend had broken into Gia's apartment that night, intending to steal valuables. However, he said his friend had taken a knife and attacked Gia. But the detectives soon grew suspicious of Michael's story. The details he provided didn't match the evidence they had collected, and there was no sign of 2 strangers at the crime scene. The lab results only added to their doubts. Michael's DNA and fingerprints didn't match those found at the murder scene, and his shoes didn't match the tread pattern found in Gia's room. In the end, the police concluded that Michael had made up the whole story. It may seem strange, but it's not uncommon for people to falsely confess to high-profile crimes, often to get attention or a reward. It's unclear what motivated Michael, but his confession turned out to be completely false. Following the murder, investigators questioned over 1,000 potential suspects and collected around 400 DNA samples. However, none of them matched the evidence found at the crime scene. In an effort to encourage people to come forward with information, a reward was offered early on in the investigation. As time went on, the reward amount increased each month. By December 2005, a year after the murder, the reward had reached $60,000. The state governor also contributed an additional $20,000 from his own funds, drawing even more public attention to the case. Despite the many leads, all of them ultimately led to dead ends. As a result, the case remained unsolved for several years. In 2007, the victims' parents took action seeking changes in state legislation. They found it surprising that the murderer's fingerprints and DNA were not in any databases, considering the brutality of the crime. The parents refused to believe that this was the perpetrator's first offense. They later discovered that, according to Tennessee laws, fingerprints and DNA samples were only collected from people who had been convicted of a crime. Jason's parents were determined to bring about change. They took an active role in shaping a new law that required the collection of DNA samples from all individuals arrested for violent crimes. The authorities backed this initiative, and the law was passed in May 2007. 2 months later, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. The police arrested 22-year-old Taylor Lee Olson for violating his probation terms. Olson had a lengthy criminal record, mainly involving theft, check forgery, and auto theft, with multiple previous arrests. Remarkably, despite his history of run-ins with the law, his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, but his criminal activities persisted. It was revealed that Olson had already come to the investigators' attention 5 months earlier when they received a tip about his possible involvement in the murder. However, for reasons unknown, the police had not pursued DNA samples for analysis at that time. Nevertheless, with his new arrest for probation violation, they finally decided to question him about Johnny's case. Olson eventually confessed his involvement in the murder and willingly provided a DNA sample. When the lab results came in, it was confirmed that Taylor's DNA was a complete match with the sample found in the victim's apartment. Following this, they collected his fingerprints, which also matched the fingerprint on the murder weapon. Olson was subsequently arrested, and detectives began to question him. Initially, Olson said he was not guilty, but he eventually decided to confess to his actions. Taylor claimed that on that night he had intended to steal Johnny's car and had entered her apartment through the back door to find the car keys. When he entered her room, she woke up and began screaming. In response, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times. However, he insisted that he hadn't intended to kill anyone, and that it had all occurred accidentally. Detectives had doubts about the truthfulness of some details, and leaned towards believing that Taylor had premeditated the murder. It was possible that he had been stalking the victim for some time, indirectly supported by the fact that Johnny's friends had reported someone following her in a car at the time. No evidence was found to substantiate this, but after Olson's arrest, it seemed increasingly plausible. Despite this, there was little doubt about his culpability, as his DNA and fingerprints were present on the murder weapon, strongly indicating his involvement. Olson's trial was slated to commence in mid-2008, and by that point, he had already retained a lawyer. Apparently, his legal counsel advised him to retract his confession, and Taylor presented a new version of events to the detectives. Now, he claimed that he had entered Johnny's apartment with his friend named Noah Cox. According to this revised account, when Olson entered Gia's room to retrieve the car keys, she allegedly woke up, seized a knife, and stabbed him several times. Olson then fled through the back door, while his friend entered Gia's room, disarmed her, and killed her. This new narrative raised suspicions among the police, as they found no fingerprints or DNA from other individuals at the crime scene, making it appear unlikely that anyone else was involved. Detectives awaited the start of the trial, but it never occurred. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Alongside him, several suicide notes were discovered, addressed to his family, Joan, his relatives, and the police. In the note to the detectives, he once again alleged that his friend Noah Cox was the actual perpetrator and also apologized to Gia's family and his own. Detectives continued to believe that Olson was responsible for the murder and repeatedly questioned him, but they found no evidence implicating him. Gia's parents also remained skeptical, believing that Olson was lying. In their view, if Taylor was truly innocent, he wouldn't have taken his own life. It seemed more likely that he simply did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Furthermore, for several months following his initial confession, Olson had consistently maintained that he had entered the apartment alone and that there was no one else with him. The sudden change in his story to shift blame onto his friend raised further doubts. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Blumel family. Roger Blumel, born January 17, 1965, was raised in a big, close-knit family with strong values. Even in high school, he was driven and ambitious. He worked in transportation and later discovered his talent in sales, where he excelled. Friends say he could sell anything to anyone, thanks to his kind, cheerful personality. He was always happy and loved making others smile. Roger enjoyed a fulfilling life and a strong bond with his family, but something was missing: a life partner. That all changed one day when he met the right person. Although the details of their meeting are unclear, a close friend recalled that Roger was immediately smitten with a young woman and confidently declared his intention to marry her by the end of the evening. The woman who caught his attention was Melissa. Born on January 1, 1960, in Wichita, Melissa grew up in a loving family of 6 siblings, although she tragically lost a younger sister in infancy. Melissa was a kind, diligent, and helpful person who always put others before herself. She started her career as a bank cashier and worked her way up the ranks, earning promotions through her dedication, teamwork, and strong work ethic. Her career was marked by success, ultimately leading to her appointment as vice president of the bank. The first meeting of Roger and Melissa marked the start of a lifelong partnership between two kindred spirits who tied the knot in 1991. On the surface, the Blumels seemed to have it all. Melissa's rapid rise through the banking ranks, while Roger's charisma enabled him to successfully launch his own business venture. With a natural talent for bringing people together, Roger thrived on sharing good times with friends and spreading joy to those around him. In Melissa, he had found the ideal partner to share in his adventures. What's more, the couple's strong sense of social responsibility drove them to participate in and contribute to various charitable, sporting, and community-driven initiatives in their locality. The Blumel had an idyllic life, but it lacked one thing: a child to bring laughter and joy. After years of trying to conceive, they decided to adopt. A social worker introduced them to Kesha, who was putting her two sons, Tony and Chris, up for adoption. The Blumel wanted a closed adoption, but Kesha preferred open. In the end, the Blumel approach won, and Tony and Chris became part of their family, starting a new life. Tony was amazed by daily dinners. The kids quickly adapted, thriving in elementary school and beyond. They excelled in high school, making diverse friends and starring in sports like wrestling and football. Tony's wrestling prowess earned him second place in a division competition, promising a bright future for the family. Tony's family life took a drastic turn for the worse during his senior year of high school. Until then, he had been a model child, but suddenly he became rebellious and constantly clashed with his parents, resentful that they favored his younger brother Chris. He started drinking, breaking curfews, and even smoking marijuana, causing chaos at home and making it seem like all hope was lost for him to get back on track. Tony had always dreamed of joining the United States Air Force after graduating, but his new behavior ruined his chances. In 2013, he was arrested for a violent offense, and then again for driving under the influence, which meant his records would prevent him from pursuing a career in military aviation. Tony's life spun out of control after these events, lacking direction after high school. He shunned education and jobs, preferring to sleep in and get high on cannabis. Melissa lived in fear of his violent outbursts, and there was another secret the family didn't know. Since 2013, Kesha contacted her biological sons on social media. Tony was excited to reconnect, but Chris seemed unreceptive. Kesha was devastated after giving them up, relieved they were with a good family together. Reconnecting with Tony thrilled her, but she resented the family for allegedly turning Chris against her. Moreover, when Kesha learned about Tony's troubles with his adoptive parents, she saw an opportunity to reconnect with her son and swiftly extended an invitation for him to visit her. At the adoptive home, things worsened. Tony's rage boiled over, and he punched a hole in the wall. This was the last straw. The family realized they and Chris were no longer safe. After failed attempts to address Tony's behavior, Roger and Melissa made the tough decision to ask him to leave. He started by wandering aimlessly, but he soon understood he needed to take action to support himself financially. He got jobs at fast food restaurants, and, to make some extra money, he also sold cannabis. Despite having no fixed address and sleeping at different friends' houses each night, he eventually fell in with a group of young people who were heavily into drug abuse. Among the midst of despairing events, a lifeline emerged for Tony when Kesha extended an invitation for him to move to California and live with her. Tony seized the opportunity with eagerness, and the reunion took place in September 2013 at Kesha's California residence. Accompanied by his high school best friend, Braden, who had dropped out in his junior year to pursue a life of drug dealing, he arrived filled with hope, seeking Kesha's support, who was well versed in the drug trade, to establish a large-scale marijuana operation in the area and even discussed entering the medical cannabis market. The reality was that they had arrived to live in a small apartment, which had only one room. It is not hard to imagine that the situation in the place began to be tense, particularly because Sean, Kesha's partner, had 2 jobs and was the only one bringing in money to cover the expenses for 5 people. Kesha only contributed a part of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Kesha, Tony, and Braden spent their days using drugs, and the woman's younger daughter was all the time under that bad influence. Sean reached a breaking point when she discovered Tony and Braden selling marijuana near her house. She told them to stop, citing the danger to her as the property owner. Then, she issued an ultimatum: get a job or leave the apartment. But instead of complying, the group banded together against her, eventually leaving for a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. However, without income, they couldn't afford the hotel bill. They didn't consider getting a decent job due to their financial struggles. Their initial plan was to head back to Kansas, possibly because Tony was familiar with the area from his drug dealings. After nearly a day of driving, they decided to stop in Arizona and spend the night at a hotel. It was during their stay that Tony shared an idea with his companions to kill his adoptive parents in order to inherit their wealth. Once they arrived in Wichita and settled into a hotel room they'd rented for a month, they focused on finalizing the details of this plan. Tony had devised a straightforward plan. He would kill Roger and Melissa, collect the insurance payout, sell off their assets, and use the proceeds to launch a more extensive drug operation. Tony was convinced that his original family would amass a fortune by growing and selling marijuana. He even pinpointed the ideal day to carry out the crime: Friday, November 15th, 2013. This date suited him perfectly, since his brother Chris would be away, attending a wrestling event related to his practice. As a former wrestling star, Tony still maintained connections with some team members, which is how he learned about his brother's commitment that evening. Tony hatched a plan to invite Roger and Melissa to a meeting under the guise of discussing their past issues and making amends. While they were out, Braden would bring Kesha to the empty residence, where she would steal valuables. Tony knew the location of a stash of emergency cash his adoptive parents kept at home. The plan was to make it look like a botched robbery. When Roger and Melissa returned, Kesha would kill them. Initially, everyone thought the plan was solid, but Braden later got cold feet and refused to participate. He did, however, agree to help by obtaining the necessary guns. As an alternative, he suggested his friend Andrew, a former high school acquaintance, who could drive Kesha to the residence and play a supporting role in the crime. Braden obtained 2 pistols from other criminals as promised. It's worth noting that there was never any plan to share the money with Andrew, who was hired to drive and provide backup for Kesha during the robbery in exchange for $11,000. Kesha would ultimately be the one carrying out the heist. In early November 2013, Kesha shared a photo on social media of herself with Tony, accompanied by a caption that read, "A bond that cannot be broken." Then, on Friday, November 15th, Tony's prediction came true. His adoptive parents agreed to meet with him, just as he had foreseen. The encounter took place peacefully. At the Blumels' house, a completely different scenario unfolded. Following Roger and Melissa's departure for the meeting, Kesha and Andrew snuck in, broke into the garage, and started searching through the house. They seized the chance to steal some small valuable items and the cash the couple kept on hand for emergencies. With the first part of their plan accomplished, Kesha and Andrew concealed themselves near the secluded residence, lying in wait for their victims to return. Tony called, saying his meeting ended and he was dropped off at the hotel. The wait was short. As the Blumel vehicle stopped, 2 attackers emerged. Kesha stood by Melissa's side. Andrew aimed at Roger. Melissa, still shocked, recognized the mother of the adopted children. She barely said, "Oh my God, Kesha," before a shot to the head made her collapse. Roger, frantic, tried to help his wife. Kesha approached, gun aimed at him, but it jammed. She tried again, Roger frozen in shock beside his wife's body. The gun finally fired, and he collapsed next to her. After the fatal plan was executed, Kesha and Andrew hastily departed in the vehicle they had arrived in. The Blumell spouses remained at the scene until approximately 9:15 p.m. when Chris returned from his meeting to find the devastating scene. He quickly called 911, reporting that he had just arrived home to find his parents semi-conscious inside their van. He described Roger as coughing and Melissa as nodding her head up and down, both with visible gunshot wounds to their heads. The dispatcher instructed him to attempt resuscitation efforts while emergency services arrived shortly thereafter to take control of the situation. Miraculously, the Blumell were still alive, their lives clinging to a fragile thread, and were swiftly rushed to a hospital. Meanwhile, back at the hotel where they were staying, Kesha appeared to suffer a panic attack, declaring that she urgently needed to take an illicit substance, which she proceeded to do, joined by the other boys. Also, at that moment, Kesha handed over the used gun and a wallet containing stolen cash and micas to be discarded in a nearby stream. Andrew disposed of the evidence in a nearby park's pond. The next day, Tony used the proceeds to start dealing marijuana, earning his first $100 profit. Tragically, on the same day, Melissa lost her battle with illness and passed away at the age of 53. Tony visited his father in the hospital, unaware that he had been previously removed from the Blumell's will and insurance policies. As it turned out, the two heinous crimes had been committed for nothing. In the days that followed, it emerged that Andrew had not received payment and was even unaware that Kesha had stolen cash from the Blumell family's home. Eventually, fate caught up with them. During the initial inspection of the Blumell residence, the police observed that the garage door had been forced open, and upon entering the house, they found everything in disarray, with items scattered haphazardly. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other valuables had been stolen. The authorities considered the possibility that the attack on the couple had been a consequence of their arrival while the thieves were still inside. However, since the fatal assault had occurred prior to the couple's entry into the home, this initial hypothesis was soon dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, no significant fingerprints were found, although investigators did discover a book casing. Then the authorities shifted their focus to the victims' workplaces, suspecting that a disgruntled client might have sought revenge. However, this theory was also ruled out, so it was time to interview people close to the couple. Tony was first on the detective's list, as he had been the last person seen alive with the victims. But he vehemently denied any involvement, claiming he knew nothing about the incident. According to him, after finishing dinner, he had returned directly to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. The hotel staff corroborated this alibi. Next on the list was Chris, who had discovered the bodies, but he was quickly cleared after verifying that he had been at a dinner with the wrestling team at the time of the incident. However, the investigators discovered an anomaly in his behavior. He didn't appear overly distraught, instead seeming lost in thought. When police pursued this lead and questioned him about his parents' disappearance, Chris promptly replied that one person came to mind. He added that the only individual who might harbor a grudge against their parents and possibly be capable of such an act was his older brother, Tony. With this significant lead, the authorities caught a fortunate break in their hunt for the culprits. A man contacted the police, revealing that a young acquaintance of Tony's had approached him to buy a gun. The detectives homed in on this individual, and upon digging into his background, uncovered a long history of drug-related offenses. Furthermore, they discovered he had accompanied Tony on a trip to California. The suspect was none other than Braden. Shortly after, Braden received a message from his family warning him that the sheriff's office investigators were seeking to question him about the Blumell case. The morning after, Braden voluntarily went to the police station. According to a press report, on his way to the station, Braden stopped at a pond to dispose of an item. Allegedly, the guns used in the crime, which had not been discarded as planned. As it happened, he was already under surveillance. And when the police searched the water, they found an unused pistol in the bag he had thrown away. Braden's interrogation lasted 3 days, during which he initially denied any involvement in the incident. However, he eventually cracked under the pressure from the authorities, confessing everything he knew, revealing that the idea for the attack originated with Tony. Tony Blummel, 18, and his biological mother, Kesha, 35, were arrested on November 19, 2013, at their hotel. Andrew, also 18, was taken into custody, and Braden, another 18-year-old, was arrested the following day. Initially, Kesha denied any involvement in the robbery and other crimes, while the 3 young men confessed. On November 25, 2013, the accused made their first court appearance via video conference, facing identical charges: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. Bail was set at $500,000 for the 3 young men and $1 million for Kesha. On December 21st, Roger's heart stopped beating, and at just 48 years old, he was reunited with his beloved Melissa. Following Roger's death, the situation for the woman and the 3 young men took a dire turn as they faced the possibility of being charged with capital murder, which carried the risk of a death penalty sentence. On January 3, 2014, the 4 detainees were formally charged with 1 count of capital murder for allegedly killing multiple people in the same incident. Kesha also faced additional charges: 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing took place on July 17th of that same year, by which time Braden had cut a deal with authorities, agreeing to become the prosecution's star witness in exchange for leniency in his sentence. In 2015, following a year of negotiations, Braden and 2 others implicated in the crime reached agreements with the prosecution. Under these agreements, the accused parties would not contest the charges brought against them, and in return, they would relinquish their right to appeal their sentences. In exchange, the prosecution agreed to refrain from pursuing the death penalty and to dismiss certain charges. In a series of separate hearings commencing mid-2015, each of the accused parties formally confirmed their intention to plead guilty. Kesha got life in prison without parole for capital murder, plus 10 years for aggravated robbery. Her sentences will run back to back. In court, she expressed regret and respect for the victim's family, but denied involvement in the crime. She's still in a high-security prison today. Tony Blummel, known to all as Tony, received the same sentence as his mother. At the hearing, his aunt Christina read a victim impact statement, thanking authorities for justice and mentioning the love Roger and Melissa had shown Tony. Tony listened in silence, tears welling up. Christina told him he'd chosen his path, and one day he might understand the consequences of those choices. Tony's now in a correctional facility with a record of many infractions. A week later, Andrew was found guilty of first and second-degree murder, sentenced to life and 155 months. Last, Braden, who'd made a deal with prosecutors, was guilty of second-degree murder, sentenced to 242 years. His first release chance is May 28, 2035, but he's had 71 disciplinary reports for bad behavior. District Attorney satisfied with case outcome. Despite waiving appeal rights, Kesha tried and failed. Undisputed, Roger and Melissa Blummel's lives ended tragically. Kesha's excess-driven life led to tragedy, sparked by a descendant rejecting her. For his part, Tony repaid the couple's love and care with resentment, envy, and violence, opting for an unjustifiable path of substance abuse that ultimately led him to commit a double crime. As a consequence, Kesha's younger daughter was forced to grow up in a foster home. In contrast, Chris Blummel, with the support of his family, managed to overcome the ordeal and build a fulfilling life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3, 1949, in Lebanon, Indiana, USA, to carnival workers Lester Likens and his wife Betty Likens, formerly Grimes. She was the third of 5 children, with 2 older twins, Daniel and Diana, and 2 younger twins, Benny and Jenny. Sylvia's younger sister Jenny had polio, which left her with a significantly weakened leg, causing her to limp noticeably. She had to wear a steel brace on her leg to help her walk. Sylvia's parents had a tumultuous marriage, with constant moving and financial struggles. They worked at carnival booths throughout Indiana during the summer, selling candy, beer, and soft drinks. To help out, the Likens children would often travel with their parents, but Sylvia and Jenny frequently stayed with relatives, mostly their grandmother. This arrangement not only kept the young girls safe, but also allowed them to have a more stable education. From a young age, Sylvia took on various responsibilities, including babysitting, running errands for neighbors and friends, and completing household chores like ironing clothes. In doing so, she earned some money, which she used to buy things for herself and occasionally shared with her mom. Those who knew her described Sylvia as a friendly, confident, and charming girl. She had long, wavy, light brown hair that fell just below her shoulders, and her friends affectionately called her Cookie. Despite her vibrant personality, Sylvia was self-conscious about her smile due to a missing front tooth, which she lost during a childhood accident while playing with one of her brothers. Sylvia loved music, particularly the Beatles, and was very protective of her younger sister Jenny, who was shy and less secure. The sisters frequently visited a local skating rink, where Sylvia would assist Jenny, holding her hand as Jenny relied heavily on her stronger leg. In June 1965, Sylvia and Jenny Likens were living with their parents in Indianapolis. The following month, their mother was arrested and jailed for theft. Shortly thereafter, their father arranged for his younger daughters to stay with Gertrude Benici, a mother of 2 girls, Paula and Stephanie, whom the Likens sisters had met at Arsenal Technical High School. Gertrude promised their father that she would care for the girls as if they were her own until his return, which was expected to be just after the 4th of July celebrations. The Likens sisters, Sylvia and Jenny, moved into the Benici home at 3850 East New York Street. Their father, older brothers, and eventually their mother went on the road with a carnival on the East Coast. As part of the arrangement, Gertrude Benici would receive $20 a week to care for the sisters until their family returned in November. At first, things seemed normal at the household. Sylvia got along well with Stephanie, bonding over their shared love of popular music and helping with household chores. The Likens sisters regularly attended Sunday school with the other Benici kids, and the pastor often commended Sylvia for her kindness and respect for sacred matters. However, when the payments for hosting the girls started coming in late, Gertrude's frustration mounted, and she began to mistreat them. This mistreatment involved physical punishments with thick objects, which eventually escalated into regular beatings, starvation, and humiliation. Sylvia faced the brunt of the abuse. Gertrude and her daughter Paula repeatedly accused Sylvia of engaging in inappropriate behavior with boys, which led to Gertrude physically kicking Sylvia in the groin and Paula physically attacking her. The girls were forced to eat food they disliked, and Sylvia was even beaten by Stephanie's boyfriend, Randolph Hubbard. Daily life at the Banfi residence was brutal. Violence escalated over time. Paula's attacks on Sylvia were savage, including punching her in the face and breaking her own wrist. She targeted Sylvia's mouth and eyes, then used her cast to inflict more harm. The sisters faced relentless verbal and psychological abuse, including Gertrude's cruel accusations of promiscuity and forced attacks on each other. The abuse of Sylvia didn't only come from the Banofsky family. Coy Hubbard and his friends would visit Gertrude's home, tormenting Sylvia physically and verbally. Gertrude and her kids would join in, inflicting harm. Neighborhood kids would beat Sylvia, using her as a punching bag, and Gertrude would humiliate her, forcing her to undress and perform sexual acts for their entertainment. Gertrude expelled Sylvia from school as punishment for stealing a gym suit, which Sylvia had done because Gertrude refused to buy her clothes. This cruelty led to severe physical abuse, including beatings with a police belt and kicks to the genitals. Despite Stephanie's attempts to intervene, Gertrude continued to torment them, inflicting further pain by burning their fingertips with matches and whipping them. A few days later, Gertrude again employed the police belt to repeatedly whip Jenny after she allegedly stole a single tennis shoe from school to wear on her stronger foot. Due to the escalating frequency and brutality of the torture and mistreatment, Sylvia gradually became incontinent, a condition for which she was denied access to the bathroom and forced to wet herself as further punishment. On October 6, 1965, Gertrude confined Sylvia to the basement, binding her with rope. She often kept Sylvia naked, providing her with minimal sustenance and frequently denying her water. Sylvia was consistently tied to the stair railing in the basement, her feet barely touching the ground. The Banfi family would occasionally interrupt their physical and emotional torment to watch their favorite TV shows. Neighborhood boys would even pay 5 cents each to view Sylvia's body on display, participating in her humiliation, beating, burning, and mutilation during her captivity in the basement. Gertrude and her children restrained and silenced Sylvia, then submerged her in a bathtub of scorching hot water. Next, they rubbed salt into her injuries. After this incident, an anonymous caller, who was the father of a neighborhood boy named Michael John Monroe, contacted Arsenal School to report that a girl with severe skin lesions was living at the Banvi household. Since Sylvia had been absent from school for several days, a school nurse visited Gertrude's residence to investigate. Gertrude claimed to the nurse that Sylvia had run away from home the previous week and that she was unaware of her current whereabouts. She also alleged that Sylvia's skin lesions were a result of her poor personal hygiene and that she was a negative influence on both her own children and her sister. The school did not pursue any further investigation into Sylvia's whereabouts or well-being. In mid-October, John Benazzi Jr. subjected Sylvia to a cruel and sadistic prank. He offered her a plate of soup, only to swiftly pull it away as she attempted to eat with her hands, which was difficult for her due to her severe malnutrition. Afterwards, Gertrude permitted Sylvia to sleep upstairs, but warned her that she must not wet the bed. Before going to sleep, Sylvia quietly asked Jenny for a glass of water, hoping to avoid dehydration. However, the next morning, Gertrude found that Sylvia had urinated on herself, and as a punishment, forced her to perform a humiliating and degrading act, masturbating with a glass bottle in front of the Banvi children. Shortly thereafter, Gertrude shouted for Sylvia to return to the kitchen, then ordered her to strip naked before proclaiming that she had branded her daughters, and now she was going to brand her. Gertrude began carving the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," onto Sylvia's abdomen with a heated needle. When Gertrude was unable to complete the markings, she instructed 14-year-old Richard Hobbs to finish etching the words into Sylvia's flesh while she took Jenny to a nearby grocery store. In what Hobbs would later insist were short, light etchings, he continued to brand the text into Sylvia's abdomen as she clenched her teeth and moaned. Richard and 10-year-old Shirley forcibly took Sylvia to the basement. There, they attempted to inflict a burn on Sylvia's body, specifically beneath her left breast, using an anchor bolt to create a mark resembling the letter S. However, due to their mistake of applying part of the loop in reverse, the resulting deep burn scar would instead look like the number 3. On that grim night, after enduring terrible abuse, Sylvia told her sister Jenny that she knew Jenny didn't want her to die, but she was sure she was going to die. The next day, Gertrude woke Sylvia and forced her to write a letter while dictating its contents. The plan was sinister. They intended to deceive Sylvia's parents into believing that Sylvia had run away from the Banvi residence. The content of this letter was intended to frame a group of anonymous local boys for extensively abusing and mutilating Sylvia after she had initially agreed to engage in sexual relations with them. After writing the letter, Sylvia was again tied to the basement stair railing, while Gertrude finalized her plan to abandon her in Jimmy's forest with the help of John Jr. and Jenny. Gertrude offered Sylvia cookies, but she refused, saying, "Give them to the dog, I don't want them." Enraged, Gertrude forced the cookies into Sylvia's mouth, and then she and John brutally beat her, targeting her stomach. On the morning of October 26th, Sylvia's condition had deteriorated. She could hardly speak or control her movements. Gertrude brought her to the kitchen, propping her against the wall, and tried to feed her a donut and a glass of milk. However, Sylvia struggled to hold the glass, which further infuriated Gertrude, who tossed her to the floor before returning her to the basement. Soon, Sylvia became delirious, repeatedly moaning and muttering incoherently. When Paula asked her to recite the alphabet, Sylvia couldn't get past the first 4 letters and was unable to stand up from the floor. Sylvia faced neighborhood bullies in the basement. She pointed out familiar faces, shouting names. After a failed attempt to bite a rotten pear, Jenny reminded her she couldn't feel her teeth, having lost one at 7. Exhausted and desperate, Sylvia tried to escape but collapsed. Gertrude punished her brutally, striking her head and knocking her out. Shortly after, at 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs returned to the Banfi residence and rushed to the basement, where he found Stephanie crying and cradling Sylvia's frail, wounded body. After their mother instructed Stephanie to clean Sylvia's body, she and Richard decided to give Sylvia a warm, soothing bath and dress her in fresh clothes. They laid her on a mattress in one of the bedrooms, where she whispered her final wish, for her father to be by her side or to be taken home. After suffering severe punishment and weakening from starvation, Sylvia finally succumbed to her injuries and died. When Stephanie realized Sylvia wasn't breathing, she attempted to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, while Gertrude hysterically screamed at the children in the house that Sylvia was faking her own death. Initially, Gertrude struck Sylvia's lifeless body with a book, yelling at her that she was lying and pretending, in a futile attempt to rouse her. Soon, overcome with panic, Gertrude instructed Richard Hobbs to call the authorities from a nearby payphone. When the police arrived at the address around 6:30 p.m., Gertrude escorted the officers to the bedroom, where she revealed Sylvia's brutally beaten and mutilated body lying on a dirty mattress. She then handed over the letter that Sylvia had been coerced into writing. Gertrude claimed to have cared for the young girl for over an hour before her death, applying antiseptic to her wounds in a futile attempt at first aid. According to Gertrude, Sylvia had run away from home with a group of teenagers. Returning to her house that afternoon, bare-chested and clutching the note. Having declared to everyone in the house that Sylvia's death was meant to happen, Paula looked at Jenny and calmly said that if Jenny wanted to live with them, they would treat her like their own sister. Following instructions she had received before the police arrived, Jenny recited the rehearsed version of the events leading up to Sylvia's death, before whispering to the officers to take them away, and that she would tell them everything. The formal statement from Jenny Likens led to the arrest of Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr. Benazzi on suspicion of Sylvia's murder just hours after her body was discovered. That same day, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were also arrested and charged with the same crimes. The 3 older Benazzi children, along with Coy Hubbard, were placed in a nearby juvenile detention center, while the younger Benazzi children and Richard Hobbs were held at the Indianapolis Child Guardians Home, all detained without bail pending trial. Initially, Gertrude denied any involvement in Sylvia's death, but only a day into her detention, she confessed to knowing the children and acknowledged that her daughter Paula and Coy Hubbard had physically and emotionally abused Sylvia. Gertrude also admitted to forcing the girl to sleep in the basement on approximately 3 occasions when she had wet the bed. When an officer suggested that the probable reasons for Sylvia's incontinence were her mental distress and kidney injuries, Gertrude became evasive. Paula showed no remorse, signing a statement that admitted to repeatedly beating Sylvia. She also confessed to fracturing Sylvia's wrist and committing other brutal acts, including pushing her down the basement stairs 2 or 3 times. John Jr. confessed to whipping Sylvia once and frequently using his fist to abuse her, also admitting to burning her with matches on multiple occasions. The autopsy of Sylvia's body revealed over 150 separate injuries across her body, and she was severely emaciated at the time of her death. The injuries varied in location, nature, severity, and healing stage, including burns, severe bruises, and extensive damage to muscles and nerves. Her vaginal cavity was swollen and nearly closed, although an examination determined her hymen was still intact, debunking Gertrude's claims that Sylvia had been 3 months pregnant and the accusations of prostitution and promiscuity. The official cause of Sylvia Marie Likens's death was determined to be a subdural hematoma resulting from a severe blow to the right side of her head. The doctor also noted that the shock she sustained, primarily due to prolonged and severe injury to her skin and subcutaneous tissue, as well as chronic malnutrition, contributed to her demise. By the time her body was discovered, rigor mortis had fully set in, suggesting that she may have been deceased for up to 8 hours prior to discovery. Interestingly, although the autopsy revealed that Sylvia had been recently bathed, possibly post-mortem, this action may have accelerated the loss of body temperature and subsequent onset of rigor mortis. In May 1966, Gertrude Bissessi, her children Paula and John, and 2 neighborhood youths, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were tried and convicted of neglect, torture, and murder in relation to Sylvia's death. Following 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gertrude Bissessi guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing her to life imprisonment. However, she was paroled in 1985. Paula was convicted of second-degree murder and released in 1972. Hobbs, Hubbard, and John were found guilty of manslaughter, serving less than 2 years in the Indiana Reformatory before being granted parole on February 27, 1968. In Indiana, the brutal murder and torture of Sylvia Likens is considered the state's worst crime. A seasoned investigator from the Indiana Police Department, with 35 years of experience, described it as the most sadistic case he had ever encountered. Sylvia tragically lost her life on October 26th in Indianapolis, Indiana, USA. Her parents were expected to return for her and her sister in November, but unfortunately, Sylvia passed away before their arrival. Sylvia and her sister Jenny lived in fear of reporting the escalating abuse and neglect to family members or school authorities. They worried that speaking out would worsen their already desperate situation. Jenny, in particular, struggled to overcome the urge to inform family members, fearing that Gertrude would retaliate by subjecting her to the same torture and abuse as her sister. Additionally, Jenny faced harassment from neighborhood girls who ridiculed and occasionally beat her whenever she mentioned Sylvia's situation. The middle-aged Bissessi couple, along with other families in the neighborhood, had suspicions or had witnessed signs of the girls being mistreated, but they were too afraid to report it to the authorities. Consequently, no one intervened to stop the abuse the Sylvia sisters suffered, and tragically, no one was able to rescue them from their horrific ordeal in time. In the aftermath, all those responsible for her torture and murder received prison sentences, although some did not serve their full terms. However, they cannot escape the guilt and horror they inflicted, which will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sarah Yarborough. Sarah Yarborough was born in Portland on June 12, 1975. Shortly after, her parents relocated to Federal Way, a suburb of Seattle, where she grew up with 2 siblings, forming a strong bond with her youngest brother. From an early age, Sarah demonstrated a keen interest in music and ballet, spending considerable time honing her skills. Her academic prowess earned her a spot in a school program that allowed her to travel to New Zealand twice. As she entered her teenage years, Sarah joined the cheerleading team at her high school, where she developed a large social circle. She was renowned for her kind and compassionate nature, often lending a helping hand to those in need. On Saturday, December 14, 1991, 16-year-old Sarah was supposed to meet her cheerleading team at the school building, where a bus would pick them up for an event. She drove her father's car to the school, but arrived at the wrong time, thinking the bus would arrive at 8 a.m. when it was actually scheduled for 9 a.m. As her friends gradually arrived at the meeting point, they couldn't find Sarah anywhere. Some students noticed her car in the parking lot, but she wasn't inside. Even when the bus arrived, Sarah was still missing. Her friends found this strange, but they had no way to contact her since they didn't have mobile phones at the time. Around the same time, two 12-year-old children were exploring the wooded area behind the tennis courts on the school grounds when they noticed something unusual. A man emerged from behind the bushes, took a breath, and walked away in the opposite direction. Although the children found this odd, they didn't pay much attention and continued walking. A few meters ahead, they stumbled upon a horrifying sight. A young woman lying unresponsive on the ground, who they thought might be dead. The children rushed back home to tell their parents, and one of the children's parents returned to the scene with them. Meanwhile, the other child's father decided to follow the suspicious man they had seen earlier. The child remembered seeing a car that resembled a Chevrolet Nova leaving the area, and since he lived near the school, his father decided to try to locate that car. After a while, he spotted a similar car, but unfortunately, he quickly lost sight of it and was unable to find it again. At the same time, the parents of the other child rushed to the school, where they discovered the young woman lying on the ground, likely dead. They promptly entered the school building and contacted the police. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed the young woman's death. They also quickly identified her as Sarah. The police deduced that the victim had been strangled, based on the marks on her neck. Some of her personal belongings, including her jacket, underwear, and socks, were found nearby. However, her purse and car keys were discovered in the school parking lot, leading investigators to suspect that the assailant might have attacked her near her vehicle and then dragged her behind the trees. The body was sent to forensic experts for examination, and the police initiated their search for evidence. As a first step, they interviewed everyone who was in the school premises and its surrounding area. The two boys who discovered Sarah provided a rough description of the man who emerged from behind the bushes near her body. They described him as a tall, approximately 20-year-old man with shoulder-length, reddish hair, wearing a dark coat and black trousers. Soon, the police located another witness, and this is where the story takes a surprising turn. A man out for a run observed a strange scene in the same wooded area. He saw a girl lying next to the bushes, with a man hovering over her. The girl was completely still, and the witness initially thought the couple was engaging in intimate behavior in that spot. However, when he ran back through the area in the opposite direction a few minutes later, both the man and the girl were still there, in the same positions. At no point did he suspect that a serious crime was being committed. The witness, a recent immigrant to the United States from a different cultural background, was uncertain about typical behavior in the country. Despite this, he was able to provide the police with a rough description of the attacker, which matched the accounts given by the children who found Sarah's body. The police interviewed dozens of people who had been near the school, but no other useful information came to light. The medical examiners who performed the autopsy on Sarah's body determined that the cause of death was strangulation. It appeared that the attacker had used his own socks to strangle her. A severe head wound was also found, and experts believed that Sarah had lost consciousness due to this blow, which correlated with the runner's account of seeing her lying motionless on the ground. Forensic experts analyzed Sarah's clothing and discovered traces of male DNA on nearly all her garments. However, at that time, in 1991, there was no DNA database to match these samples against, so investigators had to rely on direct comparisons with DNA samples from specific suspects. Another significant finding was that although forensic experts found male DNA on Sarah's clothing, the forensic doctor reported no signs of sexual assault on her body. Based on this information, investigators pieced together their own theory of what happened. Since Sarah had arrived at the school almost an hour early, and she was alone in the parking lot, it's likely that her attacker saw her, waited for her to leave the car, struck her on the head with an object, causing her to lose consciousness. The attacker then dragged her body behind some trees, where it was later found. The assailant removed some of her clothing, engaged in inappropriate acts, and eventually strangled her using her own socks. When the children who found Sarah's body reported the car they thought the attacker had fled in, detectives started searching for a Chevrolet Nova. They soon found one, but the driver proved to have an alibi. He had just delivered donuts that morning, and his DNA didn't match the DNA on Sarah's clothes. It seemed the kids had simply seen the car driving by and mistakenly assumed the killer was inside. In fact, none of them could recall for certain whether they had seen a man get into a car from the bushes. In the days that followed, police continued to search for witnesses and new leads, but made no significant progress. Despite the horror of the event, classes resumed on Monday. The fact that the murder had occurred just a short distance from their school, and the killer remained at large with no known identity, added to the unease. Afraid to walk alone, the girls were escorted to their cars or buses by the boys from the sports teams, ensuring they weren't left alone on the street. Approximately 70 potential witnesses were present at the school and its surroundings on the morning of the incident. Investigators interviewed each of them, but unfortunately, no new information came to light. Based on the accounts of the two children and the runner, a composite sketch of the attacker was created and circulated to local newspapers and television stations. The case received widespread media attention, and over the next few weeks, the police received hundreds of testimony. Each tip was thoroughly investigated, but in every instance, it led to a dead end. One promising lead involved a man who matched the suspect's description and had a criminal record. However, his DNA did not match the sample found on the victim's clothing, and the lead was eventually ruled out. The case remained stagnant for months, with the police dealing with a staggering 4,000 tips, but lacking the resources to effectively follow up on each one. As new cases emerged monthly, the investigators' attention was increasingly divided, further hindering progress on the case. When Sarah's family learned that the police were struggling to manage the influx of tips, they stepped in to help in any way they could. One family member worked for a tech company and successfully lobbied the company's management to lend the police department a powerful computer worth $150,000 in the 1990s. This generous donation allowed the police to centralize and process the leads more efficiently, categorizing them for easy review. Despite their best efforts, however, every lead ultimately led to a dead end, and the case remained stagnant for years to come. 2 years later, Sarah's classmates prepared to graduate, and as a tribute to their friend, they raised a substantial amount of money to create a memorial in her honor. The memorial took the form of a bench featuring a metal casting of Sarah's belongings alongside a poignant photo of her dog reaching for her purse. Although the case was periodically reopened and re-examined in the years that followed, the outcome remained the same. The perpetrator remained at large. During this time, the police conducted thousands of interviews and collected DNA samples from nearly 300 potential suspects. But all these efforts ultimately proved fruitless. In 2011, 20 years after the murder, a detective decided to utilize modern technology to aid in the investigation. He contacted a genetic genealogy company, inquiring if they could help locate relatives of the individual who left DNA on the victim's body. The experts accepted the challenge, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. Two main factors contributed to their failure. Firstly, Genetic genealogy was still in its early stages, and the experts' capabilities were limited. For instance, they couldn't simultaneously search for both male and female relatives from the same DNA sample. If the DNA was from a male, they could only search for male familial connections, and vice versa. Secondly, legal obstacles hindered their progress, as various laws prohibited the use of genetic data samples to search for relatives of suspects. The researchers the detective approached had spent years tracing the genetic family tree of the British passengers who arrived in the United States on the Mayflower in 1620. By analyzing the DNA of Sarah's attacker, they found a link to one of the ship's passengers, Robert Fuller. However, tracking the attacker's lineage proved extremely difficult, especially considering the passage of time. Although the Mayflower had only around 100 passengers, their descendants now number over 25 million. Despite the initial setback, this was the first time genetic genealogy had been used to solve a crime. The detective gathered available information and identified several local residents with the surname Fuller. He showed them pictures of the men, but none were recognized by the witnesses, including a runner and two men who had stumbled upon the body as children. Next, the detective collected DNA samples from all the local Fullers and sent them to the lab. Although none of the samples matched the attacker's DNA, one surprising discovery emerged. One of the men was a distant descendant of Robert Fuller from the Mayflower. However, he was not the killer and had no knowledge of any distant relatives living nearby. The detective retired in 2017, and a new team of investigators took over the case. In 2011, a company had taken over the study of the DNA sample from the assailant, and the new team reached out to them. Given the significant advancements in genetic material study capabilities, the experts agreed to try to trace the assailant's lineage. Over the next 2 years, they painstakingly worked through public databases to find even the most distant relatives of the assailant, then manually traced their family connections to individuals who lived during the time of Sarah's death. After eliminating several thousand individuals, they finally got a break in September 2019. They identified 2 new potential suspects, brothers Edward and Patrick Nicholas, who were descendants of Robert Fuller. The experts concluded that it was highly probable that a DNA sample found on Sarah's clothing belonged to one of the brothers at the time of the murder. The older brother, Edward, was a career criminal with a long history of violent offenses, and his DNA profile was already in the FBI database, ruling him out as a suspect in Sarah's murder. The younger brother, Patrick Nicholas, had also been arrested multiple times for violent crimes, but his DNA sample was not in the database because it was collected before the DNA profiles of offenders were added. The detectives put 55-year-old Patrick under surveillance right away. 2 days later, they got their chance. Patrick went to the laundromat, and while waiting for his clothes to wash, he stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. When he was done, he carelessly threw the butt on the ground. One of the officers quickly picked it up and put it in an evidence bag, then returned to his car. Patrick repeated this process, stepping outside to smoke again, and this time a cloth handkerchief accidentally fell out of his pocket. The police thought it wise to take this second piece of evidence, just in case they couldn't get a DNA sample from the cigarette butt. As it turned out, the forensic experts had no problem obtaining samples from both items. The next day, they had the long-awaited news for the detective. Patrick's DNA matched the traces found on Sarah's clothing back in 1991 perfectly. The judge immediately issued a warrant for Patrick's arrest, and the police took him into custody. It took investigators 5 days to identify the suspect and formally charge him with murder. Once his biography was made public, an obvious question arose. Why had a man with such a criminal history not been considered a suspect for 28 years? Patrick Nicholas, at 19, had attempted to assault a young woman who managed to escape by jumping into a river and swimming to safety. He was later arrested and spent 4 years in prison. In 1994, He was arrested again for trying to assault a minor, but his DNA was not recorded in any database because the charge was not serious enough. Over the next 3 decades, his name never surfaced during investigations, and he didn't appear in over 4,000 leads. It was eventually revealed that genetic genealogy experts couldn't trace him back to Robert Fuller because Patrick was adopted and grew up with a different surname. One of the men who discovered Sarah's body when they were children in 1991 immediately asserted that Patrick was undoubtedly the same killer. He admitted that the incident had deeply affected him, as he was only 12 years old when the body was discovered, and the perpetrator had seen his face for many years. The witness lived in constant fear that the killer would come after him, and only after Patrick's arrest did he finally feel safe. Patrick's trial did not start until 2023. Despite claiming innocence, the main piece of evidence, his DNA on the victim's clothing, was a major obstacle. His lawyer attempted to argue that the presence of Patrick's DNA did not necessarily mean he was guilty, but this claim was dismissed. The lawyer also questioned the accuracy of the DNA analysis, but experts deemed this entirely unreliable. In the end, Patrick was found guilty of first-degree murder without premeditation on May 25th. He received a prison sentence of 45 years and 8 months, effectively ensuring he would never be released. At the sentencing, Patrick remained emotionless, in contrast to Sarah's family, who thanked the judge, trial participants, and investigators for bringing the killer to justice after 28 years of evasion. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ada Betty Quadros Fernandez. Ada Quadros was born on September 13, 1977, in the coastal town of Chimote, Peru, to Victor Quadros, a veterinarian, and Elle Fernandez, a teacher. As the eldest of 4 siblings, Ada consistently excelled academically, winning knowledge contests and enjoying a happy childhood. Growing up, Ada spent a lot of time with one of her sisters on their grandparents' farm, developing a strong connection with nature and animals. This period was one of the happiest times of her life. Ada's family was middle class, not poor, but not wealthy either. During her teenage years, she sought ways to contribute financially, forming an entertainment group with her sister and a friend to perform at children's parties. After high school, Ada enrolled in a private university to study law, but unfortunately, her family's financial situation made it impossible for her to continue, and she was forced to drop out. Despite this setback, Ada was determined to succeed and support her family. With the goal of building a better life in mind, Ada applied for a US visa through the lottery program. Like many young people from Peru and Latin American countries, Ada viewed the United States as a land of unlimited opportunities. She was determined to migrate, work hard, earn a better income, and create a brighter future for herself and her family. Her family was overjoyed for her and sold some of their belongings to gather enough money for her journey. Her initial destination was Texas, where she planned to stay with some relatives. In early 2004, Ada started working as a waitress at a restaurant. Later, she found employment with a company that placed nannies in households, which is how she met the Lazarchuk family. The family consisted of Michael, commonly known as Mike, his wife Renee, and their 3 children, Elisa, and twin boys Ryan and Kyle. Little is known about the family's background, except that Mike and Renee got married in 2000, and shortly after, Renee became pregnant with their first child, Elisa. 4 months after Elisa's birth, Renee was expecting again, this time with twins Kyle and Ryan. The Lazarchuk couple was searching for a reliable nanny to care for their twins when Renee returned to work. Since Elisa was already settled in a daycare where she attended daily and had made friends, they decided to keep her there. After interviewing several candidates, they found Ada to be the most suitable. At 27, Ada was young yet mature, appearing healthy, strong, well-mannered, and cheerful. Renee wanted Ada to start right away so she could spend a few weeks showing her the household routines, explaining where everything was, and outlining her expectations. This would also give Renee the opportunity to observe how Ada interacted with the young twins, who were just over a year old. The family had one non-negotiable condition. They required a commitment from Ada to stay with them for at least 18 months, which she agreed to. Initially, the agreement was that Ada would only spend her days at the Lazarchuk household. But later on, they asked her to move in full-time, and she accepted. As a result, she only went back to her uncle's house on weekends. Everything seemed to be going well, and the Lazarchuk family was more than satisfied with Ada's work and had grown to trust her completely. They had many happy memories, captured in photos, of Ada smiling and caring for the twins. However, the Lazarchuk family's situation took a dramatic turn in the summer of 2005. Ada broke the news to them that her uncles were returning to Peru and then moving to Germany, and she intended to go with them, having already bought her plane ticket for October 29th. This was a blow to the couple, as it was not what they had originally agreed upon. Eventually, they came to terms with it and only asked Ada to stay on until they could find a suitable replacement. They even asked for her help in finding and selecting her successor, and Ada agreed to assist them. After Ada stopped sleeping over at the Lazarchuks, she would go back to her uncle's house every night and return early the next morning. With her departure approaching, the Lazarchuks arranged to meet several potential nannies on Wednesday, October 12th. During the day, Renee asked Ada to prepare macaroni and cheese for the children, which Ada did. After feeding the kids, Ada waited for Renee's return. When Renee got back home, she greeted her children, making sure they were doing fine. After conducting some interviews, she spent over an hour with her kids before putting them to bed. Everything appeared normal. However, at exactly 5 a.m. on Thursday, October 13th, Kyle woke up crying, which was unusual since the twins were heavy sleepers who never woke up on their own. Renee got up, went to their room, comforted Kyle until he fell asleep again, and then returned to bed. At 7:30, 2 hours later, Mike entered the children's room, roused them from sleep, gave them a hug and a kiss, and left them in Ada's care before departing for work. Just before 9:30, Renee awoke, spent time with the twins, changed Ryan's diaper, bid farewell to both Ryan and Kyle, and then headed to work. Throughout this period, the children were doing fine, with the only unusual occurrence being Kyle's early awakening that day. Elisa, their older sister, went to daycare as usual, but around 1 p.m., Ada's 911 call marked a dramatic turn of events. In a highly agitated state, Ada reported that Kyle, one of the children, had stopped breathing and was turning blue. After providing the address, the operator guided Ada through performing CPR on Kyle while paramedics rushed to the scene. Minutes later, paramedics arrived and took charge of Kyle's care. They questioned Ada, who was very distressed about what had happened. Ada explained that after lunch, she had put Kyle to bed in his crib and left to fetch his brother Ryan. When she returned with Ryan, Kyle suddenly began vomiting and stopped breathing. While paramedics treated Kyle, Ada phoned Renee to update her on the situation, providing a modified account of what had happened. According to Ada, after feeding the children, she had removed Kyle from his high chair and placed him on the playroom floor, as was her usual practice, before going to fetch his brother. However, when she returned, she found Kyle vomiting. She went to the kitchen to grab a bowl to contain the vomit, and upon her return, she discovered that Kyle had fallen. Ada claimed she picked him up, took him to the sink, and performed the breathing rescue technique Renee had taught her, but it didn't work. She also attempted CPR. Following initial treatment, the paramedics rushed Kyle to the nearest hospital. By the time Renee arrived at the house, the ambulance carrying her son had already departed, but the police remained on the scene. Renee took Ryan, the other twin, and asked Ada to accompany them. They followed the police, who escorted them to the hospital. During the drive, Renee called her husband and they met at the medical center. Shortly after, the doctors decided to airlift Kyle to the Dallas Children's Hospital via helicopter. the Lazarchikics returned home, leaving Ada to care for Ryan, before heading to the Dallas Children's Hospital. Ada requested they keep her updated about Kyle's condition. Renee worried Ada might be too nervous to care for Ryan, so she called a friend to help at the house. Her friend arrived to find Ada upset, tearful, and concerned about Kyle's fall. Ada explained that Kyle suddenly fell, and she tried to revive him with CPR. She repeatedly expressed her love for Kyle, insisting she'd never harm him. At the Dallas Children's Hospital, the Lazarchik family received devastating news about Kyle's condition. The doctor in charge reported that Kyle had suffered severe head injuries, including multiple bruises on his head, arm, and left shoulder. A neurosurgeon explained to Mike and Renee that urgent action was needed to relieve the pressure on Kyle's brain, but sadly, his survival was unlikely. A child abuse specialist also met with the parents and suggested that Kyle's injuries were consistent with abuse. The specialist emphasized that the injuries were extremely severe, equivalent to those sustained in a severe car accident or a fall from a 6th-floor height. Renee was stunned when she heard the news. At first, she suspected that Ada might have accidentally dropped the child or was too scared or ashamed to admit it. But the doctors clearly explained the severity of Kyle's head injuries, which required a significant amount of force to inflict. This made an accident seem highly unlikely. Renee quickly arranged for another friend to pick up her son, Brian, and take him away from the house. While this was happening at the hospital, Ada became increasingly agitated at home, repeatedly calling Renee's friend to ask about Kyle's condition. When Renee's friend stepped out to pick up her son from school, Ada called her multiple times, inquiring about Kyle. However, when Renee's friend returned to the house, Ada appeared calm, no longer crying or talking. Just then, a police car drove by the house. Upon seeing it, Ada became hysterical, crying uncontrollably and shouting, "No, no, no." She collapsed behind a door, repeatedly insisting that she would never harm Kyle. 2 female detectives arrived to question Ada, as she was the only adult present when the incident occurred, and had called 911 to report the injured child. As the detectives arrived at the house, they heard Ada's cries and got out of their patrol car. Inside, they found Ada extremely agitated. Once she calmed down, she explained that she had removed Kyle from his high chair and placed him on the playroom floor to help him burp after a meal. When Kyle started vomiting, Ada went to the kitchen to get a container to catch the vomit, as Renee disliked stains on the floor. While she was away, Kyle turned blue, fell, and started convulsing. Ada claimed she then took him to the living room, called 911, and followed the dispatcher's instructions. During the interview, the other officer called the hospital to get an update on Kyle's condition. Upon learning the diagnosis, the detectives told Ada that her story didn't add up, given Kyle's injuries. Ada suggested that Kyle might have hit his head when he fell on the playroom floor after she left him alone, but the officers noted that the floor was covered with soft rugs, making this explanation unlikely. Ada then proposed that Kyle might have hit his head on the doorframe when she carried him on her hip. At the officer's request, Ada demonstrated how this could have happened, adding that Mike and Renee often bumped Kyle's head without any issues. The officer checked the spot where Ada claimed Kyle hit his head, but found no signs of a strong impact. When Ada was questioned by the officers, she claimed the injury to her son Kyle was a result of a strong impact when she was running with him in her arms. She denied ever shaking or hitting him or his twin. However, the officers remained skeptical, as the injury seemed inconsistent with Ada's story. They urged her to come clean, explaining that the truth could be crucial in saving Kyle's life. Despite their pleas, Ada refused to provide any further explanation. The officers reported the situation to their command and took Ada into custody for further questioning. Meanwhile, crime scene investigators arrived to process the house. After completing their work, they gave Renee's friend, who was staying at the house, the all clear to clean and organize the property in preparation for the family's return. As Renee's friend and several others cleaned the house, they stumbled upon a piece of adhesive tape sticking out from a cabinet door under the kitchen island. When they opened the door, they noticed it was broken and held together by tape, causing it to become misaligned. They simply resecured it with the tape, but found it odd, as Renee was always meticulous about fixing broken items to prevent her children from getting hurt. Their curiosity piqued. They decided to report the discovery to the police. Shortly after, investigators returned to the scene to collect potential evidence. Later, when questioned about the cabinet door, Renee stated that she frequently used that door and had never seen it being held shut with adhesive tape before. By Friday, October 14th, all of Mike and Renee's hopes had been dashed. The doctors informed them that Kyle was clinically brain dead and had no chance of recovery. Amidst overwhelming grief and indescribable pain, the couple made the difficult decision to authorize the removal of life support. After which, Kyle sadly passed away 3 days later, on October 17th. The detectives questioned Ada, who was in prison on suspicion of premeditated assault on a minor. Ada claimed that on the day before the incident, she was preparing macaroni and cheese at Renee's request. According to Ada, Kyle was sitting on the kitchen counter, fell off, and hit his head hard on the kitchen floor. She picked him up, checked for injuries, and found only redness on his ear and the right side of his head. Ada applied cold compressors and gave him a pain reliever. When asked why she hadn't shared this with the other officers, Ada said she thought they wouldn't believe her. She didn't tell Renee because Renee had a severe headache when she got home from work and requested the lights be turned off and the house be kept quiet due to her migraines. The detectives asked if Ada had fallen with the child, which she strongly denied. During the interrogation, Ada discovered that Kyle had died and broke down in tears for the rest of the interview. The judge charged Ada with aggravated homicide and set bail at $715, an amount neither Ada nor her family could afford, so she remained in custody until the trial. The police hinted that they might charge her with premeditated actions, which could carry the death penalty. The 2005 trial of Kyle's death case heard testimony from the doctor who examined Kyle at Dallas Children's Hospital. The doctor reported that when Kyle arrived, he was already unconscious. Multiple bruises were found on the right side of his head, as well as on the left side of his head, shoulder, and both arms. 2 small hemorrhages forming hematomas were also discovered on the right temple. The doctor identified 3 main areas of hematomas on Kyle's head, indicating 3 separate impacts. The bruises were relatively recent, with one possibly 12 to 16 hours old. Internally, Kyle suffered from brain and retinal bleeding, consistent with severe trauma, and despite no broken bones, his brain tissue was significantly swollen, with an increased head pressure of 90 millimeters of mercury, far exceeding the normal 20 millimeters. Based on these findings, the doctor concluded that Kyle's injuries were consistent with severe blunt force trauma, likely caused by hitting his head against a hard object. The doctor suggested that such injuries could result from violently shaking and swinging a young child's head against a solid object, such as a kitchen cabinet door. A forensic expert from Dallas County testified about the autopsy results, which revealed multiple overlapping small bruises on Kyle's scalp, as well as a couple of small scrapes on his right temple, spaced over 1 centimeter apart. The autopsy also showed 4 or 5 pairs of similar injuries on his head. The brain had suffered significant bleeding and swelling, with bleeding in the retinas of both eyes, indicating that a substantial amount of force was required to cause such injuries. The expert concluded that Kyle's death was a result of severe head injuries caused by blunt force trauma, and agreed that it was possible that Kyle's head had been struck multiple times against the wooden door of the kitchen cabinet. The expert discounted the possibility that Kyle's injuries were caused by simply bumping into a door frame or falling from the kitchen counter. A forensic analyst provided crucial testimony, measuring the distance between the fasteners on the broken kitchen cabinet door and finding it consistent with the punctate abrasions on Kyle's head. This expert also examined the adhesive tape used to repair the cabinet door, uncovering 2 DNA traces. One of these traces had a significantly higher contribution and matched A's DNA, while the lesser trace remained unidentified. Next, Mike took the stand to testify. He recalled that Kyle was unharmed on the night of October 12th and the morning of October 13th, displaying no bruises. Mike explained that he had prepared breakfast that morning, opening and closing the kitchen cabinet doors to retrieve utensils and food, and verified that all doors were in perfect condition at the time, including the one that was later mysteriously repaired with tape. The parents shared that they had breakfast with the children and engaged in playful activities with the twins, who were crawling around a playhouse. Based on all the evidence, it's clear that Ada was the only adult in the house when the events leading to Kyle's death occurred. While the exact circumstances may never be known for certain, the prosecutor presented a possible scenario at trial. Kyle might have refused to eat his lunch, prompting Ada, who was distracted by watching a soap opera, to remove him from his high chair without noticing the open cabinet door. The prosecutor suggested that Ada's frustration or anger may have led her to attack Kyle's head with the cabinet door, which ultimately broke, leaving screw marks on the child. After all the testimonies and closing arguments, the jury went to deliberate. Upon returning, they found a Quadros guilty of capital murder of a child under 6 years old. As the verdict was read, Ada's mother, Elle Fernandez, who had traveled from Peru when her daughter was arrested, stood up and shouted that she would free because she was innocent. She proclaimed that there was no evidence to convict her daughter and vowed to start over an appeal. Kyle's parents shared photos and videos of their 14-month-old son, recounting his life from birth to days before his death. Family members spoke, while others cried. Sentenced to life without parole in 2006, Ada's family refused to give up, citing racial prejudice and poor defense. They sought appeal funding from Peru, U.S. communities, and solidarity groups. In prison, Ada consistently proclaimed her innocence and seized every opportunity to reiterate it in interviews. Her persistence eventually paid off when, in 2009, her lawyers filed an appeal, highlighting 5 specific mistakes made during the initial trial. The appeals court reviewed the case and dismissed 3 of the claims, but upheld 2. This was sufficient for the judges to quash the conviction and declare the trial null and void due to irregularities. In the aftermath of this ruling, Ada's family launched a new fundraising campaign to raise the $100,000 required to cover the costs of a new trial. It took 3 more years to prepare for the new trial, which finally began on July 10, 2012. The jury selection process started with over 100 candidates, and eventually, 12 jurors were chosen. The trial was held at Collin County's Justice Hall. The defense team argued that Kyle's head injury occurred on October 12th, when he fell from the kitchen counter. They claimed that the situation worsened the following day, when Ada accidentally hit Kyle's head on the door frame while carrying him in her arms. This time around, the defense presented a new piece of evidence. Testimony from a forensic expert with 40 years of experience. The expert suggested that some of Kyle's bruises might have been caused during his hospital stay, specifically when doctors inserted a catheter to assess brain swelling. However, the prosecution strongly disputed this new testimony. Additionally, David Gardner, an employee of the kitchen cabinet manufacturer, testified for the defense. He proposed alternative explanations for the broken cabinet door, although he didn't entirely rule out the possibility that Kyle's head could have been struck against it. A pivotal moment in the trial came when Mike took the stand, recounting the heartbreaking final 2 days of Kyle's life. Mike described how Kyle was hooked up to multiple tubes and machines, and ultimately being removed from life support, with his parents by his side as he passed away. The defense team insisted that there wasn't sufficient evidence to convict Ada, but the prosecution countered by emphasizing the medical findings and the numerous inconsistencies in Ada's story. Following the conclusion of the trial, the jury deliberated for 5 hours, even requesting to review the 911 call recordings once more. In the end, they delivered a verdict. Ada Quadros, aged 33 at the time, was guilty of capital murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In prison, Ada occupied herself by joining the volleyball team, learning Braille, and entering an art competition in which she won with a portrait of the Virgin Mary. She sold her winning artwork to raise money for a new appeal. Despite being behind bars, Ada remains adamant that she is innocent, and her spirit remains unbroken. From her cell, she and her family persist in their efforts to secure an appeal, hoping to prove what they believe to be the truth. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Schmidt family. Tyler Schmidt was born in Iowa, USA, on November 13, 1979. He grew up in Cedar Falls, a city that is home to the University of Northern Iowa. As a young boy, Tyler joined the Boy Scouts, where he earned the prestigious rank of Eagle Scout. This experience sparked a lifelong love for nature and camping in him. The camps organized by the Lutheran Church, which promoted family bonding, were particularly enjoyable to him. In his free time, he learned to play the trumpet. Tyler's true passion, however, lay in adventure and sports. He was a member of the cross-country running team and the swim team at Northern Iowa High School in Cedar Falls. He also enjoyed outdoor activities like canoeing, hiking, and snowshoeing. Later, his interest in computing led him to Truman State University in Missouri, where he studied computer science and earned his degree. It was there that he met Sarah, who would later become his wife. Sarah was born on March 27, 1980, in Kansas City. During her childhood, she spent time near St. Louis with her siblings, Karen, Jane, and Adam. Sharing Tyler's passion for the outdoors, Sarah enjoyed bird watching and studying insects. Like Tyler, she was a dedicated Girl Scout and earned the highest honor, the Gold Award. Her adventurous spirit was inherited from her mother, with whom she went on a backpacking trip to Central America. It's no wonder that Tyler knew Sarah was his soulmate when he met her as a student. Sarah excelled academically and demonstrated exceptional leadership skills, particularly in student projects focused on enhancing school life. Her positive leadership and inclination earned her the prestigious Truman Scholarship while still at Washington High School in Washington, Missouri. This scholarship led her to Truman State University, where she met Tyler. As they fell deeply in love, she readily accepted his marriage proposal. Both Tyler's and Sarah's families supported their decision to marry, recognizing that they were perfect for each other and destined to build a beautiful family together. On June 22, 2002, guests gathered at St. John Lutheran Church for Tyler and Sarah's wedding. Family members took their seats, while Sarah waited outside with her father. At 22, the couple exchanged vows, promising to stay together until death parted them. They chose Boundary Waters for their 10-day honeymoon, sharing a love for nature. In the initial 10 years of their marriage, Tyler and Sarah prioritized establishing financial security and advancing their professional careers. After completing their undergraduate degrees in Missouri, the couple relocated to Lawrence, where they pursued their master's degrees at the University of Kansas. Sarah eventually worked as a computer science expert, while Tyler held jobs at a supermarket, a delivery company, and UPS. He also had a long-term career at a company specializing in business billing and payments, which lasted for 18 years. During this period, the Schmidts' marriage was filled with exciting experiences beyond their professional commitments. The couple made it a point to spend quality time together, exploring new outdoor destinations and engaging in various activities. They regularly socialized with family and friends, bonding over their shared love of board games. Occasionally, they participated in events organized by the Lutheran Church. As enthusiastic fans of the Kansas Jayhawks, They attended basketball tournaments held at the Allen Fieldhouse. The year 2013 was a mix of sadness and happiness for the couple. They suffered a significant loss when Sarah's father passed away from a heart attack, leaving his loved ones in grief. However, 2 years later, in 2015, they experienced the joys of parenthood with the birth of their son, Arlo. In 2018, they welcomed their beautiful daughter, Lula Schmidt, into the world. When Arlo turned 6 and Lula was 3, the family made the decision to move to Cedar Falls to be closer to Tyler's family. The community of Cedar Falls warmly welcomed them, and soon they became active members of it. Tyler continued his work as a software engineer, while Sarah took on a role as an assistant at the city's public library. The children enrolled in the preschool program at Lincoln Elementary School. Tyler and Sarah were renowned for their kind nature and willingness to lend a helping hand, making everyone around them feel valued and important. This dedication earned them the admiration and affection of their neighbors and the entire community. Similarly, at the library, Sarah's warm and friendly personality quickly made her a well-known and appreciated figure, both among her colleagues and the wider community. The couple instilled their passion for outdoor activities and nature in their children, Arlo and Lula. In 2021, they began taking their kids camping, and despite their busy schedules, the children loved these trips so much that the parents made time for them whenever possible. By mid-2022, Sarah's workload had increased significantly. She took a day off in June to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary and planned another day off in July for a family vacation. She had to finish a project for the library by July 26th, but was determined not to let it interfere with the family's plans. During the week of July 11th, Sarah told her brother's wife that she would be taking the kids camping at Makata Cave State Park in Jackson County, Iowa, a popular destination known for its 13 impressive caves and stunning natural landscapes. On Thursday, July 21st, the family packed up their car and drove 140 miles to reach Makata Caves. The Schmidt family, Tyler and Sarah, both 42, and their children, Arlo, 9, and Lula, 7, arrived at the campsite before 5 p.m. As the camping area was crowded, they set up near the park's entrance. A few hours later, around 7 p.m., another family parked their vehicle about 200 feet from the initial family's tent. This family consisted of Joe and Cecilia Sherwin and their 23-year-old son Anthony, who hailed from Nebraska. The Sherwins proceeded to set up 2 separate tents, one for Joe and Cecilia, and another for their son Anthony. At the time, they were on their way back home following a week-and-a-half-long camping trip that had taken them to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The journey had been an enjoyable experience, and it had brought Joe, Cecilia, and Anthony closer together. Anthony was a devoted son, praised by his mom for his kind and sensitive nature. He was an excellent student and entrepreneur, working on a lucrative business venture that would financially support his parents. Though his mom, Cecilia, didn't know the details, Anthony kept her updated, mentioning only that his project involved secure emails. At Makata Caves, the campers retired to their tents as night fell. However, their peaceful slumber was disrupted before dawn on July 22nd by the sudden sound of gunshots. Just prior to the commotion, a man clad in black had entered the Schmidt's tent, attacking Tyler and then Sarah. Arlo, who had been asleep, was awakened by his sister Lula's screams. As he turned, he was met with a horrifying sight: blood inside the tent. Frantic with fear, he managed to escape and ran to seek help. As he fled, he heard one final shot. Meanwhile, Cecilia and Joe, who were camped nearby, rushed out of their tent amidst the chaos. Joe searched frantically for his son among the campers, asking if anyone had seen him. Arlo, still in a state of panic, continued to run until he encountered the sheriffs. He was screaming for help, explaining that his parents had been shot. Cecilia grasped his hand and ran with him to the park entrance. Once there, terrified and unsure of what had transpired, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. She was beside herself with worry, fearing that her son might be among the victims, since he had been sleeping near the tent where the shots had come from. Cecilia called the Jackson County 911 operator to report hearing gunshots, but she struggled to pronounce the name of the park where she was, making it difficult to convey her location. She explained that she was with a boy who claimed that his parents had been shot. The call between Cecilia and 911 lasted 23 minutes as she answered the operator's questions. The operator relayed the attack to the police and park rangers, but the call was briefly disconnected. Cecilia persisted and called back, only to be put on hold while the dispatcher contacted emergency responders. Despite the tense and nervous atmosphere in the park, Cecilia remained calm thanks to the adrenaline. After providing details about their exact location, she handed the phone to Arlo, the boy. He told the dispatcher that he was in a tent with his mom, sister, and dad, and when he woke up, he saw someone dressed in black holding a gun. When the 911 operator asked the child where his father was, he paused before responding that he thought his father was hurt. At 6:30 a.m., police officers and paramedics arrived at the campsite to find a horrific scene. All occupants of the Schmidt's tent were dead. The once peaceful campsite had become a crime scene. Law enforcement immediately launched a search for the shooter, who could have been anywhere. The tactical teams swiftly evacuated Macoka Cave State Park and Camp Shalom, a nearby Christian summer camp located 1.5 miles from the attack site. As officials evacuated visitors, they gathered them outside the park. Once everyone was accounted for, it was clear that only one person, Anthony Sherwin, was missing, and he was armed. During an aerial search at 11 a.m., police found a body. Upon reaching it, they confirmed it was Anthony, deceased. Although an investigation was necessary, police identified him as the prime suspect in the homicides, believing he had committed the attack on the Schmidts before taking his own life. The authorities closed the park following the incident, a measure that remained in place until July 28th. The Iowa Department of Natural Resources offered their condolences, with their spokesperson expressing devastation on behalf of the entire team, stating that the event had shaken Iowa's tradition of enjoying its natural wonders. But the legacy would continue for the millions of families who recreate in Iowa's parks. As a mark of respect for Sarah's co-workers, the local authority closed the library for the rest of the day. The tragedy also drew reactions from other political leaders, including the Iowa governor, who expressed horror at the attack and sorrow for the unimaginable tragedy. A U.S. House representative from Iowa tweeted that it was a senseless and horrific crime. Sarah's family was devastated when they lost her. Her sister was particularly heartbroken, feeling as though her life had been turned upside down. She couldn't accept that Sarah was gone, and that she would no longer be able to pick up the phone and talk to her or watch her niece grow up. Family members came from as far away as North Dakota, Texas, and Michigan to attend the private funeral service, which was held at Greenwood Cemetery on August 2nd. Meanwhile, as the loved ones of the Schmidts coped with their grief and tried to console and care for Arlo, the authorities continued their investigation into the brutal crime. According to the Iowa Department of Public Safety's findings, which were based on the autopsy results, Tyler died from a gunshot wound and multiple sharp force injuries. Sarah's death was caused by sharp force injuries alone, and their young daughter was both shot and strangled. In early August 2022, authorities officially identified Anthony Sherwin as the person responsible for the murder of the Schmidt family. Sherwin, 23, had no prior criminal record and acted alone before taking his own life, according to the police. The investigation failed to uncover any motive behind the attack. The assistant director of the Division of Criminal Investigation clarified that there was no established connection between Anthony and the Schmidt family prior to the incident, despite them being neighboring campers. The Nebraska Police Department assisted in the investigation by searching the Sherwin family apartment, but found no suicide note or any indication that could explain why Anthony targeted the Schmidt family and himself. His Facebook page yielded no clues, as it was completely blank. Regarding the weapon used in the attack, the assistant director of the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation reported that a single hand-assembled firearm was recovered near Anthony's body. This type of weapon, commonly known as a ghost gun, is built by individuals using online purchased parts without restrictions, as they lack serial numbers, making them difficult to regulate and trace. Anthony's parents confirmed that their son had built his own weapon using online instructions. However, they clarified that he did this as a challenge, not because he wanted to own a gun. They emphasized that Anthony was responsible and had never hurt anyone or any animal. The parents, Cecilia and her husband, said their family had never owned guns before. But due to Nebraska's rising crime rates, they decided to acquire some. Because they were new to handling guns, they even took classes to learn how to use them properly. They brought the homemade gun on their trip to protect themselves from crime and possible bear attacks, which they had experienced before while camping. They intended to get rid of the gun later. When they returned home, Anthony's parents were determined to prove their son's innocence. They believed he was a victim of murder, not the killer. According to his mother, an independent autopsy report showed that Anthony had been shot twice, not once, as the police claimed. She was puzzled by how he could have shot himself a second time, which challenged the authorities' suicide theory. They also questioned the description of the clothing the attacker wore. Cecilia remembered telling the 911 operator that the attacker was wearing black, which didn't match what her son had on, green shorts she had given him the day before the tragedy occurred. Furthermore, Cecilia and Joe claimed that the police did not reveal where they found Anthony's body, or whether the weapon he supposedly used to take his own life was the same one used in the attack on the Schmidts. Cecilia sent an email to the media outlining her concerns about the investigation into her son Anthony's death. She emphasized that Anthony had too many reasons to live and would not have abandoned everything in such a way. In her opinion, Anthony was incapable of killing and had no connection to the Schmidt family, and they had seen no signs of him planning an attack. When she asked investigators if they had conducted a ballistic test to confirm matches, they did not respond. Similarly, when Anthony's parents requested the final investigation report to commission an independent review, they received no response. In January 2023, a media outlet submitted a request for public records related to the case under Iowa's Open Records Law and the Freedom of Information Act. The request included incident reports, investigation documents, crime scene summaries, and autopsy reports. However, Devin McClone from the Iowa Department of Public Safety Commissioner responded that the requested records were not public, and the office could only share the immediate facts and circumstances of the case, as provided in the press release links. A few days after the tragedy, a media outlet emailed the official to ask if the weapon Anthony used to take his own life was the same one used in the murders, but she never responded. As it stands, the police believe that Anthony Sherwin was a random killer who brutally murdered 3 beloved members of a Cedar Falls family. However, the family of Cecilia and Joe refuses to accept that their son, who was kind and studious, was involved in the crime. They insist that he was another innocent victim and are determined to prove his innocence. Arlo, the sole survivor of the massacre, was taken in by his aunt and uncle in Cedar Falls. In an interview with a local newspaper, Sarah's brother proudly described his nephew as brave and reported that he was doing well mentally. The GoFundMe page set up after the tragedy continues to receive donations to support Arlo's care and education. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jessica Camilleri. Jessica Camilleri, the second daughter of Rita and Vince, an Australian Maltese couple, was born with a mild mental disability. Her IQ was between 55 and 60, placing her in the bottom 1% of the population. People with mild intellectual disability like Jessica learn to communicate and express themselves, but at a slower pace than others. They may take longer to develop skills like speaking, reading, writing, and math, but they can still adapt to daily life. Due to her condition, Jessica was slow in reaching developmental milestones like walking, talking, and coordinating movements. She started school much later than her peers, which made her a target for teasing, discomfort, and bullying from her classmates for being different. As a result, Jessica developed stress, anxiety, and anger, particularly towards females. She also struggled with intermittent explosive disorder, characterized by sudden, repeated outbursts of impulsive, aggressive, and violent behavior, as well as angry verbal eruptions that were disproportionate to the situation. At school, Jessica exhibited aggressive behavior towards both students and teachers, including a notable incident where she punched a male student and refused to release her grip, leading to her indefinite suspension and subsequent confinement at home under the care of her mother, Rita, who received a disability pension to support her. Jessica's behavioral issues were symptomatic of her intellectual disability and struggled with irrational outbursts of anger. Furthermore, she was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, a chronic brain condition that affects millions of children worldwide, making it challenging for her to regulate her behavior. In addition to these conditions, Jessica also suffered from severe bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and autism spectrum disorders, which impacted her judgment, self-awareness, and empathy towards others. She had obsessive tendencies, such as fixating on her three favorite numbers, 2, 3, and 5, each of which she associated with a specific color, yellow, green, and purple, respectively. Jessica would often repeat these numbers to generate random phone numbers, which she would then use to call and talk to men. In one instance, starting in 2018, she began harassing the staff of a meat company in Daylesford, England, even going so far as to threaten the owner's family, claiming she would decapitate them with a chainsaw. Jessica had a persistent fascination with horror movies, particularly the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She would spend hours rewatching disturbing videos, and this obsession often led to furious outbursts when her mother, Rita, tried to restrict her access to these films. Jessica and her mother lived together in a house in St. Clair, a suburb of Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. Jessica's father, Vince, had divorced Rita during her teenage years due to the strain their daughter's behavioral problems had put on their marriage. Jessica struggled with low self-esteem and a childish, naive outlook, but she also displayed strong narcissistic tendencies. Deep down, she felt she was one of a kind and entitled to special treatment due to her mental disability. This occasionally led her to be exploitative and egocentric. Despite this, Rita remained devoted to caring for her daughter, acknowledging her issues, but feeling a strong sense of responsibility to look after and protect her. Rita even went so far as to reach out and apologize to one of the recipients of Jessica's harassing phone calls, confessing that she was at a loss for how to manage her daughter's behavior. Jessica was very close to her mother, who dedicated her life to taking care of her and meeting all her needs. Instead of sending her to a psychiatric institution for full-time care, her mother chose to keep her at home. In fact, Rita's life revolved around Jessica. The tragic event of July 20th, 2019 was not a standalone incident. In the 6 years leading up to it, Jessica had been convicted twice for assaults that caused actual bodily harm. She had also physically attacked her aunt and her sister's mother-in-law by pulling their hair. But she avoided jail time and was always placed in the care of her mother, Rita, the one person who could tolerate her behavior. Jessica had also exhibited aggressive behavior towards women she encountered in the streets and shopping centers, lashing out at those she perceived as looking at her wrongly or making her feel ashamed. On one occasion, she was even barred from a doctor's office after becoming violent towards another patient in the waiting room due to paranoia. In early 2018, Jessica's aggressive behavior continued when she attacked a nurse during a hospital visit with her mother Rita. As a result, she was admitted to a mental health unit for 9 days to treat a severe episode of mood disorder. She was prescribed lithium for her supposed bipolar disorder, along with antipsychotic medications. However, by the end of 2018, about 6 months before the tragic event, Jessica had stopped taking her medication and instead began using natural remedies to manage her conditions. Rita was at her wit's end and paid $2,500 to a medium on Queen Street in St. Mary's, a western suburb of Sydney, in a desperate bid to exorcise the demon she believed was possessing her daughter Jessica. Despite her family and friends warning her about the dangers of living with Jessica, Rita remained adamant that her daughter wouldn't hurt anyone. According to Christy, Jessica's older sister, their mother Rita had a heart of gold, always putting others before herself, including Jessica, who continually refused to seek professional help. Rita's sister often voiced her concerns that Jessica might harm her, recognizing Rita's unconditional love for her daughter. However, Rita's motherly love made her oblivious to these warnings, even on the day before the tragic attack, when she had to take Jessica to a police station due to her threatening calls to strangers. Jessica felt humiliated by her mom in a parking lot after visiting her sister due to a stranger's brief presence. Later, when her mom refused to order food from Red Rooster, Jessica called the restaurant 3 times. She then demanded her mom call a doctor, but Jessica's erratic behavior scared him off. At wit's end, Rita called an ambulance to take Jessica to a mental health facility. On the night of July 20th, 2019, Jessica's most severe episode of rage was about to unfold. In a brutal attack, Jessica dragged her 57-year-old mother Rita by the hair to the kitchen of their own home. There, she savagely attacked Rita with 7 meat cleavers, 4 of which broke under the force of her blows. In total, Jessica stabbed Rita over 100 times in the head and neck, driven by a morbid curiosity fueled by her daily obsession with horror films. The autopsy revealed the full extent of Rita's injuries, which included massive trauma to her head and neck, and death by multiple stab wounds that resulted in decapitation at the 2nd vertebrae in her upper neck. Furthermore, Rita's body showed over 90 defensive wounds, indicating that she was conscious for a significant part of the attack. Enduring extreme physical pain and emotional terror at the hands of her own daughter, whom she had lovingly cared for. Jessica's 4-year-old nephew, the son of her older sister Christy, was present during the attack. The boy had been in Rita's care for a few days due to Jessica's apparent improvement. However, he was forced to witness Jessica repeatedly stabbing his grandmother and ultimately decapitating her. When the boy tried to intervene, Jessica attacked him, causing a minor head injury. The traumatic scene was so disturbing that the young boy began vomiting in response. Jessica called the emergency number from her mother Rita's cell phone, confessing to her murder and claiming self-defense, stating that Rita had attacked her first. However, this was not true, and Jessica had actually committed the brutal act. In reality, after killing her mother, Jessica panicked and repeatedly stabbed Rita's lifeless body, ultimately decapitating her and inflicting over 100 wounds. She then dumped Rita's head in a nearby neighbor's front yard. When the police arrived at their St. Clair, Sydney home, Jessica was outside, her clothes stained with her mother's blood, holding a water bottle. She showed no remorse for her actions and was more concerned about her own fate. Jessica asked the police officers and detectives if it was possible to bring someone back to life after decapitation, believing in the possibility of medical miracles that could reattach her mother's head. The police officer responded that this idea was unrealistic, but Jessica insisted, thinking that doctors could perform miraculous surgeries and reattach her mother's head. She also inquired about the potential consequences of her actions, specifically asking if she would face the death penalty. Upon learning that Australia does not have capital punishment, Jessica felt relieved. Furthermore, Jessica confessed to the police that the idea of decapitating her mother came from the horror movies she obsessively watched. A police officer's body camera recorded a chilling conversation at the crime scene on July 20th, 2019. At 11:43 p.m., the first responders described the scene as one of the most horrific they had ever seen. The next day, July 21st, 2019, Jessica appeared in court but didn't apply for bail. A friend explained that this was not surprising, as Jessica probably didn't understand the bail process. After a trial that highlighted her long history of mental illness, Jessica was found guilty of manslaughter in December 2020. She had pleaded not guilty to murder due to her disability. In early 2021, Jessica was sentenced to a maximum of 21 years and 7 months in prison. She will be eligible for parole after serving 16 years and 2 months, which would be September 19, 2035. The prosecutor argued that Rita's brutal murder was the culmination of a lifetime of escalating violence by Jessica, which started with hair-pulling and eventually led to a deadly explosive attack. The prosecutor also stated that Jessica posed a moderate to high risk of reoffending and remained a danger to the community. Christy, Jessica's older sister, said that Jessica had killed and butchered their mother, and for that, she could never forgive her. However, Rita's sister held a different view, hoping that Jessica would get the help she needed and that Rita could finally rest in peace, knowing that Jessica was being cared for by a system that had failed her when she was alive. The judge presiding over the case offered counseling services to the jury members, recognizing that the disturbing evidence they had heard could haunt them long after the trial. The judge also admitted that selecting a jury for Jessica's trial was difficult, as many people were reluctant to participate in a trial involving such a disturbing crime. The judge described Rita's murder as one of the most brutal and cruel cases of homicide a court could encounter, emphasizing that the crime's severity was exacerbated by its occurrence in the victim's own home. Jessica's lawyer revealed that his client had expressed regret in a letter to her family after the crime. In the letter, Jessica accepted responsibility for her mother's death, acknowledging that Rita had not provoked her and taking blame for her actions. However, one of the psychiatrists who evaluated Jessica noted that she struggled to communicate through social gestures and displayed a relatively flat affect. The psychiatrist found no evidence of schizophrenia or hallucinations in Jessica. The conclusion was that Jessica's risk factors could only be managed in the long term with a comprehensive mental health support plan. Since entering prison, Jessica has persistently caused trouble. Only 2 months after her arrival, on September 9, 2019, she got into a fight with another inmate over food trading and threw a teacup at them. Although she was charged with assault in local court the next day, she did not receive any additional punishment. On October 14, 2019, Jessica attacked another inmate, which resulted in her being placed in solitary confinement in her cell for 5 days. On November 3, 2019, she disobeyed an order, and on July 31, 2020, she damaged property, incurring a fine of $200 Australian dollars. Jessica was involved in another assault on November 21, 2020, which led to her being placed in solitary confinement for 7 days. In January 2021, she was convicted of common assault again, but did not receive any further punishment. Jessica has explained her behavior, saying that other prisoners make her life difficult, regardless of what she does or where she goes. She has also stated that prison life is tough and very different from the outside world. On May 15, 2023, Justice Peter Hamill of the Sydney Supreme Court rejected claims that Kaleri's original sentence was too harsh and that the judge who sentenced her had misjudged the severity of her crime. However, Justice Hamill did rule that Kaleri should be resentenced, a decision supported by Justices Christine Adamson and Richard Kavanaugh. The basis for this decision was Kaleri's bizarre behavior, including walking into the street with her mother's head and asking emergency responders if they could reattach it, which demonstrated how out of touch with reality her actions were. After considering the opinions of multiple psychiatrists and a psychologist, Justice Hamill found that Caleri's intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder meant she only had a basic understanding of what was morally wrong. As a result, he ordered that she be sentenced to 16 years in prison, with a minimum of 12 years before being eligible for parole.